Now we're going to begin Promode podcast number 5, and today we have current slash former slash maybe current again soon ESR admin Brandan. He is a long-time member of the Quake 3 community and has been one of the head admins at ESReality for at least, I think, a decade, maybe even longer. He's kind of been in the background of the Quake community for a long time, and he will be the first non-CPM player but that we've brought on. However, I think sometimes it's important when we're doing kind of, speaking to people about the past, sometimes the very distant past, it's important to give it some context, especially from the perspective of the people who were not necessarily inside the CPM community, but were around it, and I think it might be interesting to see what people who aren't directly in the CPM community have to say about it, especially somebody as controversial as a figure as Brandan, as within the ESR/Quake circle. I don't know, within the general Quake circle, I don't think he's particularly... I guess this ESReality is the general Quake circle at this point. So Brandan, I don't know, are you here, Brandan?
Yeah, no, I'm listening.
So welcome to the show. Thank you very much. I guess we'll start at the very top. Tell me a lot about yourself, how you started playing Quake, how you got into ESReality, and, we're not going to necessarily focus on CPM, but I think we'll end up touching on it here and there, and I think that might be interesting for some people, but there's a lot of other interesting stuff about in the Quake/CPM community we can talk about, so please go ahead, my friend.
Okay, well, it's pretty straightforward. I started playing Quake in high school. No big deal. Net Quake. And I played Quake 2 a little bit on Microsoft's The Zone, which was like a gaming network way back in 1999 or 2000. I wasn't very serious about any of it. I played on dial-up, but I went to a school and met a guy who played on this server, kitty1.stanford.edu, which was like a Quake server. And so I got to see a lot of these guys like Machiavelli and Thresh and everything practicing for this game. And it just blew my mind, and it kind of stuck with me for years. But after that, I kind of just, I played a bunch of different stuff. I didn't really focus too much on Quake. And I have an admission to make in this. I wasn't really a big Quake player until maybe 2010 or 2011. So that's like a 10-year gap. I mostly, when ESReality started, when I started using xerosawyer, it was not a community site. It was an editorial site. It had article contributors, those sorts of things, and eventually became ESReality. And when I started using ESReality, I was actually more of a Counter-Strike player. So I've played Counter-Strike for years and years and years. I had no idea what Duel was, even as I used ESReality for 5-6 years. I hadn't ever really played a serious Duel. I didn't know about timing items until I picked up Warsaw in 2010, where I played that for about 6 months and finally learned that you could time the items and kind of give yourself an advantage over people who don't do that. So I'm not exactly anything near an expert or even competent when it comes to Quake games. I've just kind of been loosely affiliated with the scene through ESReality for a long time.
Well, what's interesting is you said you'd started playing Quake with NetQuake, and you remember some of the old players. Were you in the Quake community, even maybe in some of the IOC channels back in these early days? Because there was a lot of kind of crossover between the CS and the Quake community in the earlier days, because they generally were the two major communities when it came to kind of FPS games.
Oh yeah, and I was an ETG user. I set on enter the game for years until it died for whatever reason. I can't remember exactly what caused it to die, but it died. And so I was around the West Coast Quake and Counter-Strike scene. Even though I lived in the central United States, I moved to the central United States when I was about 15 or 16 years old from the West Coast. And so I was familiar with the West Coast scene on a social level. I hung out in the X-Band channel. I hung out in the Chaos channel, those sorts of things. Even though I wasn't really following Quake too much, that was kind of where I socialized with people. I had a friend from high school who I talked to on there. We had a little clan. We didn't really play any games, but that's kind of the scene that I was in. So I got to watch some interesting things like 04 coming up from the IRC side of things, and I got to watch him play Tetranet with X-Band guys and stupid little things like that. Watch them all play Counter-Strike together and be idiots rather than be this this guy winning tournaments or whatever it is that people think of him. So that was kind of a fun, interesting experience, I guess, growing up.
Do you have any particularly memorable stories about any of these, people who are relatively impactful in the Quake community today?
No, not really. I wasn't really part of the clique, I guess, with a lot of the players. I didn't really play that much. I never really had the money for computers to be able to keep up with people. When I played Quake 3, I played a lot of Rocket Arena, for 6 months to a year maybe, and that's pretty much all that I played. So I wasn't really keeping up with a lot of these guys in the games. It was more just like on IRC and kind of throwing in my little bits here and there. But I people didn't really like me either because when I was young, I was really obnoxious.
Yeah, like most young people. Yeah.
Yeah, I was excessively obnoxious, and the internet gave me a way to do it without getting my ass kicked by somebody who wouldn't appreciate the things that I was saying.
Yeah.
So I was that guy, and I will say that as I watched these players kind of come into their own, that I got to see the side, like the personal side of them from a distance, through a window, however you want to describe it. I got to see some refraction of their personal lives versus what people actually believed about them or thought about them. And it gave me an interesting kind of perspective about how easy it is for people to construct an idea of what somebody is, of what they represent, turn them into a symbol for some virtue that this person holds personally, and totally not based in reality. And from that point on, all of their perceptions about that person's behavior are based on what that person represented to them in their mind. Totally, it's very interesting.
Give us some names. Who are some people who, from your perspective in the Quake community, who you know them for, and the person they purport to be, and the person they're kind of anticipated on being by some of the users are? Are there any particularly jarring figures where you're like, okay, I know this person's behavior because I've interacted with them in the past, and I know they're kind of a dick, and it seems like they kind of present themselves as a nice person, and for whatever reason they have a bit of a cult following in the Quake community. Is there anyone like that?
Yeah.
Listen, nobody listens to this thing, so you can drop as many names as you like.
That's fine. I will. I don't care really. It's not like, and I want to be very clear here. I'm not a knowledgeable person about these people. I have my own hangups. I have my own conceptions in my head that are driving my perception of reality. Whatever else. So whatever I say is bullshit from the very start.
No, it's
not. But I will
not.
say this.
Listen, it's not bullshit. Sorry, go ahead.
04 is kind of a prick. He's kind of a bully. He's kind of I've watched him play with certain kind of people, and Quake has a very interesting following because there are a lot of very angry, bitter, vitriolic personality. Like, it's in some games that personality is diluted by the sheer numbers of other players, right? So you get 50% of a million players who are just you get along with, no problems. You get 5% that are just total shitheads who want to shit on everybody they play. So the experience in a game with millions of players is a little more tolerable than something like Quake, where there are very vitriolic players that are actually present constantly in the community. So if you don't have a tolerance or a patience for that kind of mindset, or you can't appreciate it humorously, it can be frustrating. And I've seen a lot of guys like that, unfortunately, guys who have vitriolic personalities, and some who are even just trying to be funny, who get singled out and sort of ostracized by the community. And a lot of these players, and I actually like Rafa from the perspective that I haven't ever really seen him single somebody out or
Be a dick towards them unnecessarily.
pick the low hanging fruit, I guess is
Yeah.
the
Okay.
phrase I can think of. So, kind of punching down. In comedy, they call it punching down, right? So I haven't really seen Rafa do that. I've always really enjoyed watching him play. But 0-4, I've seen him do that with some people, and it kind of rubs me the wrong way. I don't know why. There's something inside of my brain, body, spirit, whatever, that when people punch down like that, it just kind of annoys me. I don't like it.
I agree. Just to play devil's advocate here, do you think people kind of acting in this prickish, bullyish way, especially in the competitive environment, I don't think that's quite always uncommon. I think sometimes it serves a certain purpose and role, especially within a team environment. And, I see it happening in every game. I guess with Quake what's different is that we're such a small community that it becomes difficult to not internalize it, because you kind of do know these people, or you have an idea of who these people are, whereas in Dota, somebody calls me an idiot, I call them a moron, we exchange some more slurs at one another, and I never play against them or never interact with them ever again. Whereas in Quake, if this guy on a server says, hey man, what the fuck are you doing? You're completely fucking up. And then he does that again the next night, and he then does again the next week. I'm gonna think this guy's just a fucking prick. Because now we have a personal relationship with one another. Whereas in a lot of these other games, that's kind of, the whole point of matchmaking is, to a certain degree, is to prevent these kind of relationships from even, if not occurring, at least from them not lasting very long.
Right. Yeah, and that's actually great. It kind of, an analog to that would be if you go to a bar every night and you've got a reputation with all of these people and you've got an idea of who you are that you want to maintain, and somebody comes along and challenges that in a way that puts that reputation on the line in a way that you don't like, then what are your options? So I can absolutely see that. So in some way, I think that's in some way I think that that's a good thing. And I like that about the Quake. I think that you have, not that you have to. I don't want to say that, because I think that you could have a huge million-player Quake community and it could be fine. But I think that with the way that the Quake community has stood for the past, let's say, 10 years at least, that having an appreciation for that sort of volatility, that sort of um, risk, reputation risk that's there, is necessary. And I think that the people who still play, whether they complain about it, whether they love it, whether they laugh at it, whether they hate it, I think that in some sense they're not addicted to it, but need it. Need that sort of risk and relationship and reward kind of scenario. And I think that's part of what makes them play Quake. Period, is because the game is such a process of risk reward analysis that it's just kind of part of the personalities of the people who play. At least something like Duel, maybe not Clan Arena or something, but at least something like Duel, where there are so many factors that figure into it.
Yeah, I can't imagine Quake ever being that big. And I don't think it needs to be, and I don't know why it's only kind of come to me recently. That I don't think it's impossible for Quake to have a community of 20,000 players playing at any time. I think that's quite realistic. And I think with the right execution, the right marketing, the right kind of promotion, the right people organizing things in the background, it can definitely happen. And once you kind of have that, I think some of the more toxic elements, they start to appear in different ways, and I think it's important to control or at least mitigate as much of the toxic elements as possible, because once it becomes the norm for people to be complete pricks to one another, eventually it feels like, and you see this with the Quake community, that every community is slowly dwindling downwards. No community's actually had any meaningful growth in a very, very long time, and those trends are true for any game in this genre. And I think one of the issues is that toxic environments have been kind of normalized, and being a dick to one another is kind of seen as a part of the norm. And I think we have to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah, I do see that anybody new is taken through sort of a hazing ritual. And I recently got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just as an example, and I had
Okay.
to quit. Lazy, but
No.
it's the same thing. When you start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a lot of these gyms that are, people run, there's a ritual. There's like some kind of process of initiation, some rite of initiation, where you just get, you get so beat down that you puke or you're bleeding or you get choked out and you can't breathe. And in some sense, Quake is like that. It's like survival of the fittest to the extreme with gaming. People join a game, and if they're bad, they get shit on. If they're good, they get shit on. If they're bad but they get lucky, they get shit on. There's so many different ways to get shit on in Quake, but not very
It's
many
true.
ways to not get shit on. So that even if you succeed, even if you're 0-4, you're going to get shit on by some guy on a CPM podcast for being a dick.
Well, no. First of all, being shit on inside the game is one thing, but letting players think it's okay to communicate with one another, or the people in the community think that they can be complete dicks to one another outside of the game just unnecessarily, I think you got to be wary of that, and I don't think that's a good strategy moving forward. And there has to be some sense of altruism that, okay, if we all like playing Quake, and if we all like not having people being dicks to us, then there's something we have to work out here together where we can all play Quake and all try not to be dicks to us, or try to limit that as much as possible, because at some point everybody's going to get fed up and say, fuck this isn't worth it, I got other things to do.
Right, and that is a very real problem, and that does happen very regularly with Quake.
It does, and it's weird that, because I think the Quake community, and it's happened in the CPM Discord server, they have a very Hollywood sense of what their rights are, and as soon as you tell people, okay, listen, you're stepping out of line, they start to kind of enact, even like sometimes Canadians or Brits or Europeans, something about like freedom of speech, and it's just like, you don't, that doesn't apply here because this is a private community, and I think there's got to be some role for allowing people, giving people, meaningful ways to express themselves, whether it's agreement or disagreement, and sometimes saying, okay, well, this conversation just doesn't need to happen here because it just doesn't have anything to do with us. And I think what's interesting is in the past that it would be dealt with inside the game is when people had a disagreement, you just kind of duel it out, and whoever wins was just kind of right and you move past it. And that doesn't really seem to happen here. People don't play as much.
Yeah, and I don't know. I've struggled through that with a few games. So I played Warsaw,
Yeah, okay.
and I'll say Warsaw because it's about guns and it has pigs. So I say Warsaw. I don't know how to pronounce it, and apparently the developers had a big argument about it. But when I played that, it was the first time I'd taken duel seriously. Like I said before, it was when I learned how to time item. The movement in Warsaw is really enjoyable. The dash feature, it's kind of similar to CPM movement. I liked having auto hop. I know that there are probably people who are going to scoff at me for that, but I liked auto hop. I don't like tearing up my space bar or my right click button or whatever bouncing around 60,000 times in a game. When I played that, the community was very welcoming. Everybody was but it was such a small community. There was still some toxicity. But it was very, very welcoming. When I switched from Warsaw to Quake Live, it was like the game clicked for me. I really enjoyed the physics. The VQ3 physics I really loved. I liked the fact that there was now double jumping, so it was a little bit more fluid gameplay, but kind of slowed down compared to something like CPM. Even though I like Warsaw, I love CPM, what I've played of it so far. Something about Quake Live clicked in my head, and I was like, oh, I love this feeling of this game. Even when I started Quake Live, at the time there were thousands of players, and this was around 2010 or 2011. Thousands of players. It was much more welcoming than years later. So it's something about what's left, I guess the dregs of the Quake community, something about what's left in some of these communities is just the toxic players that have remained around. And there's nothing, like you're saying, there's nothing really preventing them from spreading that toxicity, from kind of spoiling the game. Like,
and if you try to, you're accused of like taking away people's fucking fundamental freedoms. It's like, dude, this is a fucking...
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Get the fuck out of here.
First Amendment applies to the world, and it doesn't just apply to the United States federal government. It's so silly, and that's like one of those weird defense mechanisms that how can you argue with that? There's nothing I think that you could rationally say to that person to convince them to stop their behavior. The voice, the sound coming out of their mouth, the letters coming out of their fingers as they're typing, that's not rationality. That's just an emotion driving a behavior to try to manipulate or convince somebody else at the other end that it's not worth dealing with. And it works. It works amazingly well. So it's like an effective, kind of adaptation that people have taken. And there's nothing you can really do about it except for, and this is something that a lot of gaming companies are doing now, is restricting the online experience, and in a lot of ways, if you have you played Counter-Strike Global Offensive at all?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. In Counter-Strike, and I'll just say CSGO. In CSGO matchmaking, it is incredibly toxic. There's a range of skill ranks that you can achieve, and the rank that you are determines how you're placed in matchmaking. There are algorithms, whatever. Some giant AI under a mountain is figuring out who to place where for matchmaking. And so you start out with like these silver dog tags or something like that. You move up to gold stars, you move up to AKs, and finally you reach some kind of eagle or something stupid like that. And at a certain rank, the game is just fun. It's just like you're playing the game, you're having a good time. Nobody cares whether or not you threw your nades at the right time. Nobody cares whether or not you stayed with the group when you were supposed to be having, planting the bomb at A and you went B or something. Nobody cares. You just play the game, you have fun, you talk shit on the microphone, and everybody's having a great time. Once you start getting into the gold star ranks, people start taking the game a little bit more seriously, and they start asking you to buy nades and start telling you where to throw things and how to shoot and how to do all of these things. And suddenly people are instructing each other over the microphone or getting frustrated or yelling at each other. So there's a very distinct break off where players start to begin to take the game so seriously and get so frustrated because their expectations for their experiences aren't being met. And with CSGO, it doesn't, the toxicity is still there. It's just, I don't know exactly how to describe it.
It just seems to be built into competitive environments. Because people want to win. People want to win, and these are supposed to be competitive games. There's lots of money on the line. There's some people that are grinding to get better, and for them to get better, that means they have to practice very specific scenarios. And if you're not playing your role, and it's interesting. It turns more of it from just like a game to almost like a dance, something kind of almost artistic, where things have to happen at certain intervals, and then things just start to click. Artistic. A-R-T, not autistic. A-U, sorry.
Well, I think it could be argued it's both.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a lot like general, sports, at some point it's when people start doing exceptional stuff, people describe it as art in motion, it's a common turn of phrase used. And I think in games especially free-flowing games like Quake, you can get a lot of that as well, and you're kind of fucking up the dance, that's the problem.
One of the things, and this kind of goes with what you're saying right now about the artistic kind of and dancey side of Quake, is the online experience for some people can be very, very inconsistent. With the way that unlagged netcode is implemented in different engines, you can have a totally different experience. In Quake Live, there were some changes made at some point to something, and it really changed the way the game was played on the web, which for a lot of people was frustrating because they had expectations based on having played Quake Live before or played Quake 3 or anything else. And, they had these expectations built on those experiences that weren't being met anymore. And it was like, you have to change your gameplay to keep up.
Well,
and that's one of the things that a lot of people say, and I'm almost done with this.
Sorry.
Is that Quake has to change in order for it to develop a new following or a larger following or a more rewarding following. Quake has to change. We have to stop playing Blood Run. We have to stop playing Arrow Walk. We have to stop playing whatever map that's been played for the past 30 years and move on to something new. We need something new so that, people have a chance and all these other things. But something new, first of all, is not inherently better or good. And if a new player sees something for the first time, it is new to them. So it's not like they're going to watch Blood Run and be like, oh, Blood Run again. They're going, somebody comes in and they see Blood Run. It's new to them, and they just need to stick with it long enough to understand the nuances and the subtleties of the gameplay, those sorts of things. So there's almost an integration period when a new player comes into a game that they have to be hooked somehow. And with people I've shown Quake, they're not hooked. And even personally, just other than playing Rocket Arena 3, I just wasn't hooked by the game until something caught me. Something that I did in the game suddenly caught me, and I said, oh, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. And it's the same with something like golf or bowling or baseball or anything else. It isn't until something catches somebody that they stick with it. And for whatever reason, players who are being introduced to Quake games aren't being caught. And whether that's Quake, Quake World or Quake Champions, they're being introduced. People are downloading the game, they're buying the game, they're playing it, at least initially, and they're not being caught by the game. Why are they not being caught by the game? Whereas they can play Counter-Strike 1 or 2 times and be caught, or they can play, League of Legends a few times and be caught. What's the difference there?
Well, I think one of the main differences is that going into a game with a large community already is a very different experience to going into a game with a dead community. There's just kind of a natural excitement around being surrounded by a lot, being in a big community. I think there's lots of kind of different competitive avenues for you to explore. And there's going to be constantly ways for you to play the game in a competitive environment. Quake doesn't have that to begin with. With respect to being cool, I think you're right. And when you look at the kind of the modern environment for video games, you can see that, the multiplayer-only games, especially with the kind of payment models they're using, they're starting to kind of take a back seat again to to more in-depth, immersive single-player games. And I think Quake starts off as a single player game, and I think that's where they really need to go back. And I don't think it's particularly hard to kind of give people to get them caught, because I think what you really need to do them with the fun part of Quake, and I think you've said this and I've said this already, is the movement system. Once somebody develops a certain level of competency with the movement, I think it's very hard to play a game that doesn't have a similar kind of mechanic. It's hard to play an FPS game without strafe jumping or bunny hopping for me. I just don't find it particularly interesting. Excuse me, I gotta sneeze. Sorry about that. And because of that, and the response to that has been, by the Quake community for the past 15 years, I think very unintuitive and unfun. And that's we need better training simulators, we need better guides, we need better, basically environments for players to play with bots and get better. And the way that's a really good point. But you know what? The execution has been, or the expectation for the execution has been so crude that things like strafe jump pads or like moving targets that you hit. Nobody plays video games to go into a fucking training simulator. You do that if you find a job or you have to do something you really don't want to, or you're kind of forced to. People play video games on their leisure time and they want to have fun. So it's got to start off with a good story, strong characters, probably strong acting, a good good graphics, and a very responsive engine. I don't think these 4 or 5 things are mutually exclusive, and I think you can have it in one game, and it definitely have the talent to do it. It's just, I don't think they perceive Quake as a particularly meaningful IP currently, and this might be, Quake, I think Machiavelli said it recently, and I was going to touch on this because we were talking about older Quake players, what their perceived, kind of identity is and who they are. Because somebody made it very interesting. But anyway, we'll get to that later. Training, even Quake Champions is employing the same kind of very brute force approach. Here are some strafe pads. If you can do it, great. You can play the game. That's not fun.
Yeah. Yeah, here, do some work before you play. Let's
give people a really good... Can you imagine a Quake game? You start the single player with absolutely no skill mechanics, okay? You go forward, backwards, you can jump like in every other FPS game, and as you cleared the first level, you are given the ability to double jump now. So for all of level 2, you can do the basic movement and double jump. Okay, you move to the next level, you now have the ability to do some basic strafing. So, it tells you how to do it, and you kind of do it, and you progress through the level by starting off by simple strafes and more sophisticated. You integrate it into the story and the first player experience, and I think, as people can pick up on very sophisticated mechanics very quickly. There's a reason why there's tens of thousands of people playing Dota at a high level. It's not hard. I don't think.
No, I don't think it's difficult, and I think you make a great point. And this is kind of what Quake and Quake 2 were, and I guess even Quake 4 to a degree. I didn't play Quake 4 at all.
I don't think anybody did.
I did play single player for about 30 minutes on the Xbox 360, and it was terrible. I shut it off. I regretted the purchase. But Quake and Quake 2 were not necessarily directed training in the sense that, here's how you bunny hop or here's how you double jump or any of that.
Yeah.
But they gave a player an arena in which to enjoy the game without the pressures of competition. And that's a problem I've had when I'm new to a game, is I don't feel as though I feel as though it's a waste of another player's time to have to play with me if they're getting nothing from it. If I'm not challenging them in any way, it just feels like a waste. I feel like a burden. I feel like I'm the moving object in the Quake Champions training simulator.
Yeah,
I feel
that's
like
right.
I'm that. So for a lot of these for games like Quake, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Is gives the players a chance to adapt and acclimate to the movement, to the concepts, to the weapons, and then develop just a little bit of confidence so they can actually start playing the game. Whereas in something like Quake Live and Quake Champions, they're just thrust into this world of free-for-all, this chaos that they have no conceptualization of, and expected to sink or swim.
Yeah, and there's just far too much competition to have that sort of expectation from the average person. That's, let's be frank, if Quake wants to be successful, it doesn't need to appeal to 30-year-olds. It already has that market. It needs to appeal to people who are like in their early teens, in their teens, in their late teens. That's where the next generation of Quake players come from. They're not going to come from, not some 45-year-old guy that's been playing for 20 years isn't miraculously going to become the world champion all of a sudden.
Yeah, and I'm kind of torn with regard to Quake Champions, because part of me, I see the design, the game design, and I have my own criticisms, I have my own opinions, and part of that is,
yeah, let's just jump into Quake Champions. Actually, fuck it. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So characters like Anarchy or Slash. Okay, when Quake 3 came out, they weren't cool. They were just it wasn't part of the culture at the time when they came out. It wasn't cool, but even now they're not cool, and nothing about the game resonates culturally with the rest of modern culture. No, I mean, it's built with a modern engine, has modern graphics, modern whatever, but culturally it just doesn't seem to mesh with what's going on.
And you know what's something which and I don't think that's completely lost on them, because you have to consider they try to kind of memify this game, and I say that seriously, like they try to incorporate memes into the game and hope that that's to be something they catch on. And something people have to realize with memes, that even though they may get a lot of attention very quickly, it usually dissipates just as quickly. So sure, you can get 10,000, 20,000 eyes on Quake Champions because one of the characters is giving the middle finger, but if of those 20,000 people, if next to none of them, even if they all buy it, if next to none of them play it, like, you've kind of failed the game in a lot of ways, because the whole point of it is to be competitive, and if there's no one playing, there's no competition.
Yeah, and I think that it's easy to get a sense from a corporation, from some game developed by a big publishing house, however you want to describe it, that doing that sort of silly, humorous stuff, it can almost be forced a lot of times and feel contrived,
Yeah,
and as though it's desperately reaching out for attention rather than that's an intrinsic aspect of the personality of the game.
correct.
And so I think that Quake Champions fails in this way to reach people. But I have to say that that's not a make or break criticism in my mind, because I've seen just absolutely ridiculous, terrible ideas succeed, where every rationalization, every everything that you could think about it is that it would fail. I've seen it succeed just by virtue of being whatever it is. So in some sense, I say that that's a criticism, but in another sense, I'm like, well, let's see where it goes. Let's see how it develops. Maybe that will be its personality. Maybe that will become its personality. Maybe it will set some hooks into culture. But I highly doubt that that's going to be culturally relevant to most of to a large number of people who are playing video games now. Video games, it's just it is a culture now. It's not just a subculture anymore. It's a culture. There are men, women, boys, girls, things that are in between that I can't begin to name. There are so many different people playing video games now. It's such a large part of what I'll say Western civilization, but Eastern civilization, just world global civilization, that that to run headlong into it with a backwards concept of that culture is going to be met with resistance. And I don't see Quake Champions in the direction it's currently going culturally as being able to establish any relevance in a current market.
Yeah, Quake has become in a lot of ways, within the context of, like, I guess, esports and the video game industry, a kind of a cultural relic. And the mistake they're kind of making is just by trying to somehow force themselves into relevance through cheaply associating themselves with modern culture, as opposed to kind of doing something substantial, as you were saying earlier. Make a game with an impressive atmosphere, with strong characters, with, I guess it's very easy for me to say, make a really good game.
Yeah.
But you know what?
Just do it.
Its software obviously have the talent, at least to give it the right visual look. We saw that with Doom 4. I think there are lots of great voice actors, and we've seen, lots of games in the past few years that have very strong acting. And I don't think these actors are hidden or somehow contractually completely incapable of doing work. I'm sure if id Software wanted to hire, it's not impossible either. And the real question comes, I think, with Quake Champions that's been bugging me is, what was the pressure, what was the market pressure for them to do this? Why now?
I like to speculate about this.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
It's a little thing. I love to do it. I don't know why. Something, maybe I was pinched as a baby or something, but something makes me enjoy speculating about things like this. And what I speculate is that Quake Live was a risk. And John Carmack left after he announced Quake Live was going to be a thing, right? If I'm recalling correctly. So it was this grand experiment for them to be able to churn out web content for users so that they could play on multiple platforms from anywhere. And it was a really cool idea. But somewhere along the line, the direction went bad. And I'm not sure where or when that happened. But something happened, and the development direction became kind of out of touch with what the community wanted or what they were enjoying. So you could log into Quake Live at any time in its heyday, let's say, and you could find packed Rocket Clan Arena. I guess I have to call it Clan Arena now. You could find packed Clan Arena servers and just play. You can find duels, you can find free for all, you can find CTF matches, you can find all of this stuff. And then at some point, things just started switching and changing. Netcode became a little weird, and there was a period, and I was talking about this just the other day. Netcode became a little weird, and there was a period where you couldn't even rocket jump properly from the lower yellow armor on ZTN on Blood Run. You couldn't even rocket jump properly from there up to the platform
With the rocket launcher,
the red armor. Yeah. You couldn't. You just couldn't do that properly, and you had to be in a certain position. And if you clipped the bottom ledge, there was a time where you could clip the bottom ledge and go up, and then it went through a period.
Brandon, you're cutting out.
So there were these weird little bugs that were popping. and everything sort of started falling apart. And then they decided one day to introduce loadouts, and they decided to introduce new game types and all these sorts of weird things. And I think some of that came from what we were talking about before, where people stress in the community. People stress, oh, we need new, we need new, we need something new. People are getting tired of the old. We need something new. So they come out with these weird game modes that maybe 20 people play consistently, and then everybody else tries once or twice as a curiosity, and then goes back to what works: clan arena, free for all, TDM, CTF, and Duel. Those five main staples of Quake for the past however many years.
To give
And
this,
then,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know if you saw this, but in ESReality there was a post that was posted, I think in the past day or two, it's an interview, I think, with Shaki S with Tim Willits, and he described one of the reasons for some of the weird decisions they made. When Quake Live, first came out, they had hoped to make money through in-game ads. However, according to Tim Willits, that just never happened because the game was too fast. For them to make money off it, the players, it had to cover an X amount of screen space and it had to do it for an X amount of time. But because the game was so fast, it would never actually make those requirements, so they never made any money off it, which is why they ended up scaling things backwards.
Right, and I do remember the switchover point from when it went from ads to no ads, and I remember there were weird bugs at the time where it would take too long to connect to a server and those sorts. So yeah, and that does make sense, and it's kind of like that's what that game was a risk to figure those things out. So in some way, Quake Live was a beta for Quake Champions. It was a low cost, already developed engine that could be kind of ported over to some specific application, and from there played with freely to see how players responded, to see what works, what doesn't work, and it was kind of ahead of its time as far as free games go. Now
Yeah,
we're
in a lot
seeing
of ways,
those.
absolutely. But
In a lot of ways.
you know what? They could have employed a lot of the design decisions and they did, because there's a Quake Champions version out there somewhere on somebody's hard drive for Quake Live. You can use the Quake 3 engine and everything. Although they use the same assets as Quake 3, I don't think, from what I've heard, they didn't generate any new assets. But you can play the same heroes and stuff. That should have been the real way to test it, I think, initially, instead of kind of going balls deep with a third-party developer that doesn't really have a particularly impressive track record. It seems like I'm still uncertain if this was some sort of decision from up top for them to kind of force them to do this. Like, why didn't id Software just wait until there were free in-house to develop Quake Champions? There was no market pressure, as far as I can tell. There's no market demand for a new Quake game.
Right, and that's a good question, and there isn't really a whole lot of information coming out from id or anybody affiliated with id.
Have you seen any
And
Overwatch League?
no, I haven't. I haven't
Okay,
watched any.
you know what? You might not like Overwatch, but just if you can get a chance, there might be even some games that are happening today and tomorrow. There's doing the preseason. Just look at the level of execution that Blizzard puts into its products and look at it, compare it to id Software. And
Okay.
it is like what Blizzard are doing currently with the esports side of Overwatch. It's now the golden standard. There is nothing that's even remotely close to their level of like execution. They've just done a phenomenal fucking job, and this is somebody's already given you the blueprint in a lot of ways in terms of what the standard has to be if you want to release a multiplayer competitive game, and you put Overwatch and Quake Champions next to each other and Quake Champions can't come close to Overwatch as it is currently, even if you compare it to the early Overwatch betas.
Well, I'll have to watch some Overwatch games just to kind of get an idea of what you're talking about. But I can say from the very, I spent 20 minutes playing Quake Champions.
Yeah.
20 minutes. I started a game. I installed it. It ran fine. I got great performance. I have an old 5-year-old computer. I got great performance. I didn't have any issues with frame rate, anything. Uh, it was getting into a game that was problematic because I had to figure out how to select my heroes, and this was just a beta thing, so it's not a big deal. I won't complain. But once I got into the game, it was one game was maybe 8 to 10 minutes. I can't, and then I would get kicked out of the game after the game was over and have to sit through this animation process and wait and then go find another game. It was not very enjoyable in finding games. And I don't know if that's changed in the past few months or not, but it seemed a very tedious process, a very tedious interface to use from the. And this goes back to just like we were saying before, it's just it feels like there's too much work involved in getting into the game, and then not enough joy out of the game to make the work worth it. So it's almost like the economic decision there is obvious for most players is play something else.
Yeah, right now I don't fully understand. And I think a lot of people in the Quake community are just as confused about what's happened. Because this is it. This is the last hurrah. I hope the Quake community is aware that, you know, the people that own id Software are not going to accept these sorts of results. This is when you put Quake Champions next to the most recent Wolf games, the next to the most recent Doom games, it's the difference between day and night. They are, you know, there's going to be people not necessarily upset, but there's going to be changes to how the next Quake game is made, and they're not going to let the IP that they've bought from id Software just die. That's a that's no return on their investment. And if once I hate to be harsh but what I anticipate is once that Quake Champions dies out, the whole series will be rebuilt without strafe jumping or a lot of the other stuff that the hardcore Quake players are used to, and you can expect it to be more like the new Doom and Wolf games, and then it will be like any Quake games you've seen before. And maybe that's not a bad thing, but that's what I anticipate happening in the next 10 years with Quake.
And I could see, you know, I'm not particularly serious when it comes to Quake purity. I don't really care. Like I said, I played Warsaw. I enjoyed the dash feature, those sorts of things. I'm not a purist in any way of movement or anything like that. And if they could take it some other direction, make it popular and it's an enjoyable game, great. That is a very real possibility that's what could happen. Um, I like you. I don't know. I don't understand what's going on. I don't think that there's a lot of information about what's actually going on, and id Software has kind of been like that for the past 7 or 8 years. I guess since around the time Carmack left, I interviewed Steve Nicks, who was the manager of Quake Live, and Sync Air, Adam Pyle. I interviewed both of those guys at QuakeCon 2010. It was a really fun time, but it was just so hard to get any information that wasn't. It was almost like I was interviewing Hillary Clinton. Everything that and I don't mean that in a negative way, but just there's a certain um, disingenuity that comes from somebody like Hillary Clinton. She's a character. She's on display. She's there for a pageant. She's creating a perception in people's minds. She's manipulating them into believing something she's saying. It's an act. And when I spoke with Steve and Adam, I got the perception from Steve that he was a genuine guy. He had a desire to do something.
What was Steve's role? Sorry, if you could just say it one more time. What was Steve's role in id Software?
As I recall, he was creative director or manager or something along. He was the guy running. It was sort of like what Tim Willits is now to Quake Champions.
Understood.
As I understand.
And at the time, Sync Air was still lead design on Quake Live. This was about 3-4 years ago, right?
No, this was 2010.
2010. Okay, 7 years ago.
Yeah, this is a long time ago, and this was kind of right around the time that Quake. This was right before really Quake Live started to die. Right around this time, Quake Live was really popular. It was getting a lot of interest and a lot of play. People were just it was a vibrant community at the time. Shortly after that, I know Steve Nicks left the company. I don't know why. I don't know what happened there. I like to pretend that maybe he saw the direction that things were going. You know, he saw what directions he could take things and couldn't take things and decided to cut his losses and run or whatever happened. But shortly after that, he left, and I think the decision making, I don't know where it went. What I do know is that you had Sync Air and you had Sponge making a lot of the design and development decisions, and things started to change in the game. But like you said earlier, just something as innocuous as whether or not an ad can play for so long could be the motivating factor behind a decision. So I don't want to assume that there was any motivating factor other than something simple that may have changed the direction of the game. It could be that Steve Nicks' wife got pregnant, or somebody had an accident in his family. He left, and that just changed the path of the game. It was nothing intentional. So I don't know, but that's the point that I was making, though, is that they weren't very forthcoming with the development process. It was very hush hush, very look over here, look over there, kind of directed interview. So it was difficult to get anything that the community wanted, because the community wants
What's Sync Era like?
What is Sync Era like?
Yeah, I mean, I've never met the guy in person. I have to be honest with you. All my interactions with him online have always been very pleasant, and he's always been very helpful and generous.
Yeah, absolutely. Every time I've ever talked to this guy online, he's been very, very polite, very helpful, very accommodating, and he seems to genuinely want to try to help when he can. Some examples are, and I've totally trashed this guy in the past. I've said some pretty crude and rude things about him just for fun, just to joke around. I'm not a good person for it, but that's just happened. And he's still been accommodating and nice and polite, and we've had great conversations. He's the same way in person. He's just kind of
I think he's kind of a little bit of the id Software scapegoat for, like, id Software, you know, all the stupid internal beefs they've had. And he's kind of been like the last guy that got hired that's kind of been said, here's this legacy community that has what they consider a very prestigious history. And try to appease all of them. And we're not going to give you much resources. It's just going to be you, and here's a little bit of money, and you're going to get one dev, and good luck. Yeah, that's what it's felt like.
Maybe he fights for it behind the scenes and just can't talk. He could be the champion of Quake. Maybe Sync Era is the last guy, and you never know who it is. You know, the last guy fighting for you behind the. You never know. So maybe it's him, and I could see that. But the thing is, when you try to please everybody that way, it can't work unless everybody wants the same thing. And there's nobody you can ask 50 to 100 different players who've played Quake Live, Quake 2, Quake 3, whatever, for the past 10, 15 years, and they'll all give you different answers for what they prefer or what they think is best or what they think sucks. There's no way to please or appease any of those people, except, and I say there's no way, except for what Quake 3, Quake 2, Quake 4 had, which is, you know, the capacity to modify the game. And then you get into another plethora of arguments of splintering the community and all these other little theoretical problems that people have. But the main fact is you cannot please everybody with something you do to a Quake game unless you give them the option to undo it.
Sorry, just give me 1 second. Well, the question of splintering a community, I think that's when you're having that sort of conversation, I think your community is relatively, you know, at least when it was happening with Quake and these initial conversations were happening, it was in a good place. There was enough people to splinter and have lots of communities, and I think usually a good sign for the Quake community to have is lots of really small kind of regional communities, you know, that are kind of splintered. So you have like a Russian scene, a Polish scene, a Swedish scene, so on and so forth. I think you're right. In terms of game types, they can't be broken up too much, but, you know, the vast majority, when I think about, you know, the early 2000s and what people were playing, you know, of the 20,000, 25,000 players that would peak at, I don't ever remember it hitting 30,000. I remember seeing or I remember reading somewhere that at some point Quake had hit 30,000 concurrent players. You know, that's not a lot, by the way, by today's standards.
No, that's nothing.
That's when that was the golden age. That was the golden age of the community when it was alive. By the way, you know, when you think about it. Sorry,
there was nothing really to compete with Quake at the time as far as brand recognition. I mean, the circumstances were so perfect for Quake 3 because everybody who played Quake 3 had played Quake 2. There was just a series of successes for id Software. And, you know, other than Unreal, other than Half-Life, there wasn't really a lot that was competing with it.
And I don't think modding is really viable in 2017. Do you know how much fucking artwork is required behind the Quake Champions maps? Like, it's ridiculous, you know, it's impossible today to actually have mod teams because it requires the same amount of effort as a professional project.
No, that's true, and I think that's kind of, you could ask yourself whether that sort of complexity is necessary.
That's true.
There are communities, Terraria community, the Minecraft community, where there are just tens of thousands of players who are modding together. Here's an example. I'm going to date myself. I have a bunch of kids. My oldest son is 13 years old. He plays Terraria. He sprites. He's nonstop spriting. And when I was a kid and I was doing sprites, it was terrible. I was trying to draw swords and they looked like penises, and I just gave up. But he draws this stuff, and it's got shading, it's got all this stupid stuff that the kids do, and there are tens of thousands of these kids just modding Terraria, and that's a huge game. And their mods half the time aren't completed. It's just the process of coordinating with each other, communicating with each other, creating that community of productivity and creativity. It kind of binds them together, whether or not they're successful. So
there has to be a certain graphical fidelity, I think, for Quake because you know what, it's got like a dark, gory kind of history to it, or slash, like very high tech. And I think both of these kinds of, styles require a decent amount of visual fidelity. And I think if you look at Painkiller, I think they hit a really good kind of medium. But I don't know, like even BSP based maps, like people don't really use that sort of technology anymore. It's difficult.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a great point. I mean, and there are so many. It's so subtle to build such a complex map like a Quake Champions map. I don't know what the process is necessary to actually build.
And then, it's software ultimately built engines as well, so they're not, they want good shit. It's not gonna. They're not gonna be using old tech. Yeah, that's right.
But even when I watched the finals for this DreamHack Denver, I think was the one. No, maybe I don't. Even when I watched the finals for this DreamHack event, my son walked up behind me and said, "Oh, that looks great." And I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, yeah, I guess it does. I started looking at it, kind of ignoring the gameplay and everything else, and I'm looking around the map and I'm like, this is actually a really good looking aesthetic for the levels.
Yeah, some of the levels do look great. Listen, I don't think any of the weapons look good. Actually, the only two weapons I like is the single barrel shotgun and the gauntlet. I think all the other weapons look awful. I'm sorry.
I do like the classic Quake rocket launcher, but somebody said something and it kind of stuck in my head. I can't unsee it now. They said it looks like just some big swinging dick out in front of the player.
Oh yeah, I also read that comment too, lol.
Yeah, so ever since they said that, I've just, I've got some kind of weird homoerotic association with a big swinging dick, and I can't appreciate it anymore.
It's so. What do you think of Sacrifice? I think Sacrifice is just as confusing as the game design and as like how the game has been kind of unrolled. Like it's just.
Okay,
I don't get it completely.
I haven't watched Sacrifice at all. I don't care. I haven't watched a lot of CTF. I don't like TDM. I'm more of a dual player and than Rocket Arena. So I haven't watched any Sacrifice. So how would you explain the game?
It's actually not that sophisticated, and I think that's one of the problems that people kind of historically people have tried to make Quake more sophisticated, or they have presented Quake as more sophisticated than it. So basically how it works is the following. It's a iteration of one flag CTF. So you play 4-on-4, and at a certain point, at the 20-second mark I believe, what spawns on the map is effectively a flag, but they call it a soul. You grab the soul and you take it to one of two bases. Each base has what's called an obelisk, basically a flag stand, and you deposit the flag there, and now you defend that position. Once you put the soul into your obelisk, or the flag into your flag holder, whatever the flag stand, excuse me, it starts to build up meter. Once the meter hits 100%, you win that round. You have to win 3 of those. I think it's BO3 actually. So you have to win 2 of those rounds to win the game. And at the beginning of every round, the bases are reset.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward.
Except for, like, they made this really poor design decision, I think, of using terms that people are completely unfamiliar with, such as souls and obelisks, when you could have just said flag and base. And I think people inherently, because they're so familiar with what flag, base, and CTF are, because this is basically it's a combination of TDM, CTF, and domination, but it's mainly just a one flag variation. And it's really messy to follow. The people that play it say they enjoy playing it, but I don't think it's I don't know. I think it deserves more time, but it seems like a real mess currently.
Well, that's one of those aspects of the game that I'll say I'm ambivalent about, because I could see that what your loose criticism there of the terminology being a little bit confusing, and I'll go even further and say it's a little bit cheesy. And
Corny, dog.
Even that, I could see that if somebody was hooked to the game and played that mode and enjoyed it, I can see that not being an issue. So I could see it going either way. But I think that's a very valid criticism, and it's pervades the design of this game. You know, you look at one aspect of the game and you see these strange, odd design decisions, to be a little bit flamboyant with the terminology, to take it this far rather than scaling it back just a little bit. You know, how far do we take the lore in this game? How much do we force these new players to learn and understand about the lore, terminology, and everything else before they can actually just get in the game and play it?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that just kind of pervades the design of Quake Champions in my experience, and from what I've seen of what people have written of the game.
And I think you've brought this to light earlier as well, that you said when Quake first came out, it really had no competition. But in today's market, creating unnecessary barriers for people to be able to... Listen, Quake already has a lot of initial barriers for the average player. The movement system is kind of convoluted. Yes, it's fun, but it's still convoluted. It's unnecessarily sophisticated, and that's what kind of makes it fun, that it creates this weird, hierarchy of how good players can be, and lets people kind of fill in lots of small gaps between each other. And this, the differences can be quite meaningful even if they are small. So confused, looking for, at this point, if you realize that you already have kind of pretty high base minimum requirements for people to go from being completely destroyed in the game to enjoying the game and kind of contributing to the game in a meaningful way, whether that's duel 1-on-1 and playing a close game, or in a CTF game where you help your team kind of win the game. There's already a lot of issues there. To kind of take that another step forward and say, okay, well, we're going to introduce terms that people are not familiar with, and let them kind of figure it out in the first 5-6 games. Because, in today's market, that's too many games for most people, and they're turned off and they're gone. Goodbye.
Absolutely.
Selling your game can't be the only consideration. Building a community so that your IP has some longevity is worth something. It's worth a lot. I mean, it has to be worth a lot, because here we are in 2017 with another Quake game.
Yeah, and there's what could they do? What could they do at this point? And that's kind of a question I ask.
I think reboot. I think that's.
Reboot, yeah.
I think that's.
Say, okay. Are you familiar with the sunk cost fallacy?
Yes and no. I've come across it before, but if you ask me what it is right now, I couldn't tell you.
Okay, I'll describe it in a loose way, and keep in mind I'm an idiot, so whatever I say, take it with a grain of salt. Don't just trust me. I might say something really stupid right now. sunk cost is basically this idea that you should keep doing something because you already have invested so much into it. Even, ignoring the pros and cons at the point that you decide to keep doing it. You keep doing it because you've invested so much. And the reality is if you keep doing something that's going in a bad direction, it's going to end up in a bad place. So the sunk cost fallacy there would be continuing to do it because you've invested so much into it and still ending up in the bad place. And that's kind of like there's this quote that I love, and it's, "The path to hell is paved with good intentions."
Ah,
So
yes.
a person can want to succeed at something so much and invest so much in something that they just can't let go. And so they want so badly to be great. They want so badly to do good, but all they do is leave a trail of bodies behind them as they try to achieve this thing with the wrong direction. And there's something tragic about that and noble at the same time and sad. And I think that in a lot of ways, developers end up in this cycle of fallacy, of sunk cost fallacy, where they get so far, they've invested so much that it seems like it's impossible to walk away, to just drop everything and walk away before you just destroy everything. And would you say that for Quake Champions, something like that would be necessary?
Well, I don't think there's any way out. Like, I was speaking to, I don't know if with another ESR admin, Butcher. He's this Indian guy. Have you ever spoken to Butcher before?
I think I've played Quake with him quite a bit. He's a North American guy, right?
Yeah, he plays from North America. He's a good guy.
Yeah,
And
he's like Butcher KGP or something along those lines.
yeah. I think the technical issues, there's one thing with respect to the conceptual game. Conceptually, they've designed this set of rules, these are the boundaries, this is how it's supposed to play out. We don't really know what that's like right now because there are so many issues, technical issues, really kind of preventing the players from exploiting all the opportunities available to in the conceptual game. Because the hit registration, it has issues, the hitboxes have issues, the netcode has issues, there's issues tied to its input, there's there's issues with like memory leaks and performance. If these issues didn't exist, at least I think we could have an honest conversation with respect to the design decisions. But right now, there could be a great game, potentially. I don't think it's completely likely, but hiding underneath all the shitty technical problems they're having. But the technical problems, I think, are so ingrained into the engine that I don't think you can just write your way out of it.
Yeah, and I could see that as a possibility. And that's another thing, and this is part of id kind of keeping things so hush hush in a way. Is I'm kind of agnostic about where I expect this game to go. On one hand, I could see that it's a beta, that there's a lot to get done, but they're professional, they work with professionals. Maybe it gets done, and maybe it's a success. And I could see on the other hand where it's the train wreck, and we're just waiting for something to get crushed. So I'm not sure which direction it's going to go.
I mean, we started off by talking about SAC, but I guess, and I think you've iterated a couple of times at this point, that you're mainly a dual player. What do you think of the new dual mode? What do you think of the inclusion of champions and abilities?
Here's the first problem I have with dual and Quake Champion. I haven't had an opportunity to play it. I played 30 to 45 minutes of free-for-all, or deathmatch, I think they're calling it now, and went to try to play a duel, and I could not play. I just could not play. The reason was that I could only select one champion. I hadn't unlocked enough champions to be able to play duel.
Have you watched any duel?
Yeah, I have. But from a perspective of somebody new, just kind of going with the rest of the conversation so far, from a perspective of somebody new coming into a game, not being able to play a game mode because you haven't unlocked enough content, doesn't seem like a path for hooking into the game.
Let me ask you this: if I give you a game right now, okay, a free Steam game, you've never heard of this game before, and I say, yeah, it's a great game, it's got a bit of a high score requirement, but once you get the gang of it, it's great. You've never heard of this game, and I'm just like, it's got a long, online history, blah 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 blah. and I give it to you, you install it, you download it, you go to play, and it says you can't play. There you go. What incentive do you have once you exit that game to open that game up again?
Oh, none whatsoever. And the thing here is, even with a game type like deathmatch or sacrifice available, I still have no incentive to play because personally I don't enjoy those game types. So I'm having to grind through free for all to be able to unlock characters to play the game type I want to play. It just the incentive, like you're saying, was not there for me. Even if I'm not a new player who has no idea what I'm getting, even if I do enjoy Quake, and to get back to your original question, and even if I do enjoy Quake and I enjoy the idea of the champions and all of these changes I'm interested in, I'm not like I said before, I'm not a purist. I don't care about any particular Quake over the other. I have in the past said, Quake is the best because that's the one I started playing first, so I had a weird thing with it. But other than that, I just don't care. It's just a game, and the reason I keep up with it is because I'm part of the community, and I have been for a long time, so I'm aware of it. That's the only reason. There's nothing special about Quake for me, and I wrote a column about it called "I'm Not a Fan." I posted it on ESReality. I'm not a fan of Quake. I do enjoy the games, and I try them. I'm not a fan. So from my perspective, the champions idea, I love it. I think it reminds me of fighting games where you get a lot of dynamic back and forth between different styles and different power-ups and different moves, different behaviors, different everything, different personalities, all of this stuff. And I think it adds a lot to the game. I don't know that the way it's currently implemented is fun to watch. I have no idea if it's fun to play because I haven't had the chance to do it. But for watching it, from what I watched of DreamHack, when the dynamic worked, it worked. It worked very well. Watching certain players play against each other, kind of feel each other out, get a sense of what each other player was capable of with each other character. A perfect example is I think it was the last match of the game, Toxic and Dehang. And somebody, I think Zoot, was commenting that, Toxic needs to bring out Clutch or whatever big character he was using. Toxic needs to bring him out first and then follow up with the other characters. Because every time Toxic had this character, I don't think it was Clutch, it's Sword Lag. Every time Toxic had Sword Lag, he was fragging Dehang. And he kept coming back with Sword Lag. And Zoot said he's got to bring it out. He's got to bring that one out first. And after a couple rounds, that's what Toxic did. He brought out Sword Lag and he won that particular round. So watching that change was really interesting. It added another layer of spectating dynamic that I think is a positive thing. I think it works for the game type. So that was enjoyable to me, and I think that it could work to give people that reset in some games to keep things interesting, to keep things entertaining, so that it's not a runaway game where somebody's getting stomped because all of the items are being Pac-Man'd, and there's no lull or anything, and it's a comeback is a grind, and from that point on the spectators just kind of have to sit back and wait for the end. Having these champions and having this round-based system is an interesting way from a perspective of a spectator, I think.
What's your beef with Zoot? Okay. Sorry, you probably didn't expect that kind of response, but I figured you'd be. Sorry, I asked that in jest almost, but I think you have an interesting perspective on Zoot, and I think, like Sinkara, I think to a certain degree, he's been a little bit of a scapegoat as far as the community is concerned. And it seems both of them kind of have to play a devil's advocate to kind of have a balance in terms of the conversation. If we all agreed that what they're doing is completely wrong, including them, then there'd be really no more conversation to be had, because it would just mean that it's the end of Quake to a certain point, I think, because it's just like, well, we know this isn't going to be successful, so if the developers can see that there's no profit here as well, they're not going to develop this. That's the most kind of rational way to move forward. Right. But you've also kind of had some criticisms of people, and sometimes they've been a little bit harsh, and I don't think that's, that's not the worst thing people can do. So, people say stuff they don't mean, and so on and so forth. But yeah, what do you think of and I guess let me ask you a broader question. With Quake Champions, we've seen a lot of the old members of the Quake community come back and have prominent roles, kind of be almost relevant again. What do you think of these people? And did id Software make the right decision by kind of going again, tapping into the past instead of like really looking to the future?
Okay, so I wrote on ESReality right around the time that Quake Live really started dying. I wrote a small little comment analysis. It was basically, the idea was that the apology patch for Quake Live, which is where certain game modes and servers and sort of things were introduced that the players really, really wanted and that have kept it alive over this time, and probably to the detriment of Quake Champions, honestly. But that apology patch, I wrote an analysis that said that, it was kind of a love song for Quake from id Software. And so I can see where these guys are sort of trapped between a rock and a hard place, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that with guys like Zoot, let's say. When you have a public persona, some people like to protect that persona. Some people like for the people who are aware of that public persona to be aware of it in a certain way. They have an image, and they want that image to be maintained.
Or reputation,
whatever it happens to
yeah.
be, and that's fine. That's there are some people like that, and there are some people who don't care. There are some people who would come out and just utterly expose themselves to the world and judged so harshly for it, and yet still be able to survive and enjoy themselves and be successful. And it's going to sound kind of stupid, but you have a person like Miley Cyrus, who's just tatted up, has done so many drugs, has exposed herself physically and mentally to the entire world, and was still successful for it. So there's a dichotomy there of opposing ideologies, and both are functional and lead to success. So it's not to say somebody like Zoot, who maintains a well-groomed image in public, versus somebody like Miley Cyrus, to say that either of them is correct would be a little bit of a stretch, because both of them are successful in what they want to achieve. So I want to say that right off the bat, to say I appreciate personalities. I don't have anything personal against a guy like Zoot.
Of course.
I appreciate I enjoy his personality. And the other thing I really like is fighting with strong personalities. For some reason, maybe it's because I've been using the internet since I was 15 or 14 years old, and so obnoxious. For some reason, I've developed a joy of speaking with people in argumentative terms, and of fighting ideas. Something like, you might say InfoWars. It's such a stupid website, whatever. But InfoWars is a real concept. There's a battle between two people when they speak about concepts. There's a battle between those people to establish a dominant concept in the other's reality. You're battling for a person's perception of reality. And I enjoy that. I think it's a very fundamental, enjoyable thing to do as a person, to be able to relate to people and reach mutual understandings of what reality is. It's just fascinating to me. So from that perspective, I love guys like Zoot. I love guys that are just challenging, strong characters who put up a fight. That's an interesting thing about his personality.
He never puts up a fight. What are you talking about? It's always like a one-sided flogging.
Between him and me, I disagree. No, I disagree. I think that a lot of people who read what he has to say don't actually and agree with him, don't actually comment. They don't actually respond. They don't voice support. They're the kind of people who don't care about that kind of stuff. They don't care about saying whatever they want. They're silent supporters. So I think there are a lot of people who agree with what he has to say, even though in a lot of those exchanges that we've had over the past, there were things that I think he got fundamentally wrong that people were wrong to agree with. They still agree with him. So I think they're out there, and it's a lot more common than maybe perceived, just because there were a lot of vocal critics as well who kind of joined in with me when all of that was going.
People saying your mic is too low, so I'm just going to boost your mic. Give me a second.
Okay. Boy, I hope everybody could hear all of these wonderful nuggets of wisdom that I've been frying up.
To 160. Should be a lot better now.
Okay.
Is that better?
Is it better? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm asking people who are watching.
I know, that's why I'm talking.
Lol.
To give them something to hear.
Yeah, that's fair. Quake Champions. Do you think the patches they're planning Okay, it seems like
I
it's
think that
better. You- Do you think? Do you think it? You actually haven't answered this. Do you think the game is salvageable? I've expressed my concerns, and I think what I think. But what about you?
I have a fundamental problem with Quake games on, and it is netcode. In my mind, it's a problem of relativity. It's just something that you just can't avoid, whether you address it with anti-lagged code or not. It's just there's a problem with relative perspectives being processed by a central server or an authoritative server that determines what reality is based on the input of so many other players. So Quake being a fast game, I think has an uphill struggle with internet play regardless. That's one thing that I think it's got working against it. With Counter-Strike, a lot of the netcode problems can be disregarded because it's a slower game. You know, people aren't running around corners and hopping around at super high speeds. Um, and you don't have a lot of projectile weapons that kind of give you a sense of things not being instantaneous, not having that instant gratification of clicking your mouse and having a shot register. So I think Quake is salvageable with some very specific circumstances being met, and I can't even pretend to know what those circumstances are. If I had to wager a guess, I think that Quake's biggest problem is not the execution of the game or anything else, because we've seen millions of people are willing to play Call of Duty, and these games have 0-day bugs that break the game. You lose your save data, you lose your profile, you get killed by people. People are hacking, everything else. 0-day problems with these huge AAA blockbuster games. Nobody cares. So I don't think that that's a big issue in the mind of people who could play the game or be drawn in to play the game. I think the big issue is the cultural relevance. If 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 the creative direction of the game could be altered so that the game is more culturally relevant to a larger chunk of the players, then I think from a financial perspective and from a player based perspective, the game could be salvaged. But getting people in to play the game with characters like Anarchy and Slash and all of these esoteric naming schemes like you were describing with Sacrifice and that sort of stuff, I just don't think that that the initial draw is there. I don't think that the weight of Quake's name is as heavy as it was around
I
the
don't
time of
think it
Quake.
has any weight.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it has
Nope.
some weight, and I think it has some legitimate claim. You know, if you wanted to argue about it with somebody, it has some legitimate claim to the history of gaming. But culturally, yeah, I think you're right. Very, very little to no weight culturally, and that, in my mind, I think that that's being missed here. Is that culture has bypassed Quake, and Quake has sort of festered in its bubble for so long, and the players have kind of inbred so long that catching up with culture is going to be like a hobo grabbing a train that's rolling by at 60 miles per hour. You know, it's going to tear his arm off. It's either the train has to slow down or the hobo has to speed up. So he's got to steal a motorcycle and then jump onto the train. There's got to be some way for Quake to steal a motorcycle, for it to speed up with culture a little bit and catch on, so that it can work with it. And if it can do that, if Quake can do that, I think if Quake can do that, that it could be salvageable. But I don't see that happen. I mean, there was one.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'll be quick about this, but there was one post on ESReality about Tim Willits describing this idea of having a Fallout character, a Vault Dweller, or something like that, as a champion in the game, or of having the one of the Skyrim guys, the guy with the horned helmet, or something along those lines, as a champion in the game.
Yeah.
Something like that. If that were announced, if the game through beta was playable, if it got to a playable point where most people could have a satisfactory game without complaining about their experience in game, if they could find games easily, if all of these little bugs and everything, development bugs, are ironed out, which I think any competent development team could do. I don't think that that's out of the question, even for Saber or anybody else. If all of those little things were ironed out, and the Quake team announced that this character was going to be in the game and this character was going to be in the game, I think that it would be a big initial draw culturally to attract people to just try the game. And that if you attract 20,000 players to play the game, and let's say a quarter of those players are hooked, they're going to tell their friends, they're going to continue playing, and that's great. If you can continue that cultural relevance throughout the lifespan of the game by releasing new content and getting new players just piquing their interest, just saying, oh, I'll try this. That's a character I like, or that's something that's relevant to my life, then they'll try it. But if you're restricting yourself to these anarchies and crashes and esoteric terminologies, then there's nothing to draw those players in over the life. So I think that they have to have that approach culturally, and I don't see that at all. I don't see anybody at id Software who is culturally relevant. When you look at a guy like Tim Willits or SyncError, you don't see somebody who seems like a gamer or somebody who's invested in general culture at all. I see an old bald white guy and a fat greasy haired white guy, and that's it.
Well, not very nice, Brandon.
I'm not
no, I know. He's a
cultural monoliths. I see people who are kind of just
disconnected.
Like players.
No, maybe not.
They're like players.
And they are, with respect, kind of generic, middle-class, middle-aged white males who, are kind of like a lot of other people in the community on the more nerdy side. But some of them, I think, have had a lot more exposure to the world, and as a result, I think are more in tune and have a better idea or have a better ability to read today's pulse culture. Here's an interesting question that Zeb posted here: is like, how does culture appeal to games like Dota and LoL so much more? Is it
okay?
Yeah,
I've thought about this a little bit, and I've got to say that circumstance plays a large role in a game's position. Let's make it an analog of Quake positioning. Your position is going to play a large role in what you're able to do at any given moment. If you're already down and you have no stack and you're standing out in the middle of some map, you have nothing that you can do short of a miracle to avoid being fragged at that moment. And if somebody pops up, then that's it, you're done. So from the perspective of Quake Champions, it's in a very challenging position right now, where it has no stack, it has nothing to its name other than the game that's being developed, and there's nowhere for it to really go without competition or butting up against some already established some other game with a stack, so to say. So a game like Dota, I don't know the history of it very well, so I may be totally off here, but I think that it kind of came up in a time where it didn't really have a lot of competition. Wasn't it kind of a pioneer in the MOBA genre?
Yes, effectively. Okay. It kind of created its own lane, it created interest for itself, and what Valve did was they saw that there is something that is attracting people to this, and said, okay, we're gonna make it run really well, it's gonna run smooth, we're gonna, give it good artists and a good, general system, and it ended up working out really well for them. They could have executed on the same levels and they could have been a complete failure, but Valve generally have they have that kind of magic touch like Blizzard does, which id Software did have.
Good sense. They offer good resources. They let people kind of do what they need to do. And this is with Dota, it's similar to Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike at the time that it became popular, and it was extremely popular. When Quake was at its peak, I think Counter-Strike was double, triple, whatever that.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the time that Counter-Strike came out, it had no competition. It was just a grassroots mod. I think Dota was the same way. Just a grassroots mod that people played because they really enjoyed the gameplay.
It was really, fresh in a lot of ways. There was nothing that you could play that had a comparable experience. And the idea of, 5-on-5 terrorists versus... And, yeah, look at the time when it comes out and it gets big, It's around 9/11, and they'd already kind of tapped into this good guy, bad guy narrative, and that, believe it or not, shows that it was in tune with the culture with respect to, what's going on. Whereas Quake Champions, it really, you look at it and it's really just a bunch of relics that people don't recognize anymore.
Yeah, what name out of anything in Quake Live or Quake Champions really stands out to anybody. You've got, Cyberpunks, which was like an 80s thing. And I know there's kind of an 80s revival going around right now, but it's just not that aspect. It's almost
No,
like a
absolutely.
B-grade.
Yeah, that's right. The 80s revival is more around like 80s pop culture, 80s graphic work, 80s artwork, and the kind of the neon lights and stuff. It's not so much the goth stuff. You're right. Like this darker
Right.
stuff isn't coming
A
up.
lot of the chaff has been separated off over the past 20 or 30 years. So, to get back to the point that I was making is Counter-Strike was in a unique position of having very little competition, of having a very good, simple, straightforward gameplay type, and having a large community of people who modified the game, who contributed to the game, who just, they built the community up organically. And that was the position Counter-Strike was in. So I can't say that Quake Champions can do that now. Quake Champions can't be built up organically that way. It's just not in the right position to do that.
No.
You can't. It doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the circumstances aren't correct for it. There are so many games out. It's just another vanilla shooter at that point. There's nothing it really does to stand out or create a grassroots movement.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's kind of that's what I wanted to, in response to that question, is that Dota is in a different position in different circumstances than Quake Champions, and Quake Champions is really in a very bad timing in my opinion. It's like showing up early to a red armor and you're on an FFA server and everybody else has a full stack. It's just that's what Quake Champions is up against right now. So very unfortunate timing and very unfortunate design decisions, in my opinion.
It's not unfortunate. It's just, it's unfortunate for the players and the community, but these are very intentional decisions. It's when somebody wrote it down, said, this is a good idea, and somebody who approved the money for it reviewed it and said, yeah, this is a great idea.
Yeah. And,
you know what I'm saying?
I see that. But in practice, in working on projects that I've worked on and everything else, I see that there's a lot of information that is missed by people. And this goes back to the very beginning of the conversation that we started talking about, was this idea of people having perceptions that they develop in their minds that aren't necessarily based on reality, on an external reality. It's just a delusion in their head that they develop, and then their behaviors from that point on are responses to that delusion, and how their perception of reality is shaped by that delusion. So people involved in Quake Champions, they may have this delusion in their mind that something's going to break through, or that this is what they need. And in the sense that it was a bad decision, their decision might have been a good decision, but it was based on the bad delusion that wasn't an actual representation of external reality. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's kind of a way I've begun to.
They thought they had a good idea when they did it.
Yeah, and it's kind of my default response to criticism of creative endeavors at this point. I mean, I still I'll talk shit about whoever, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to a design decision and I'm not a fly on the wall who actually witnessed it, I can assume that somebody maybe just had a bad idea and thought that idea was true, and there was nobody there to tell them it wasn't, or if there was somebody there to tell them it wasn't, they didn't reach through to them.
They were too scared to say anything. Because honestly, there's something about Tim Willits and Sincera and their body language, and when they've been talking about it, at least on recently in the past two streams, you can see the concern there. It's present. They're aware that what they had in mind is not really resonating with the player base, and that the player base is reverting back to the previous game. And to be honest, that player base has been shrinking for the past for the past few years anyway.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And one of the things I've kind of picked up in the past few years is that if you really just sit and listen to somebody, like you sit and listen to Tim Willits speak, like you're saying, you observe his mannerisms, even if you disregard his behavior, the substance of his address to people was stop playing Quake Live. And one of the particular recent videos that came out of him, stop playing Quake Live. That was the substance of his address. What is motivating him to say that? Why is the number of people playing Quake Live
concerning?
Yeah, right, exactly. And from my perspective, it's because there is some sort of heat being drawn to that issue.
Something
That the
imminent,
game,
yeah.
Quake, yes, something imminent, yeah, and I don't want to think that hypothetically about it, because I've seen my predictions turn out to be wildly inaccurate. Maybe there was some other reason for it. Maybe he genuinely cares for these Quake Live players, and he doesn't understand how they can't, how they're giving up the goodness that Quake Champions provides by remaining Quake Live players. Maybe he believes he's this altruistic spirit bringing them the next incarnation of what they love. I don't know. But from my perspective, I think it kind of matches yours. Your observations of him there's something imminent, and it's not positive for them as a development team.
Its software is just stuck 10 years behind. And okay, let's take it these two things and accept these two things. The game's currently out when it really shouldn't be, and the current state that it's out is really poor. Okay, let's deal with them. Now they still have 3 major tournaments that occur. Okay, QuakeCon, DreamHack Denver, DreamHack Winter, and honestly, outside of like 1 or 2 of the on-screen personalities, and that in combination with just how poor some of the streams were, it hasn't been a particularly first good experience, even from people who aren't invested into it at all and are just checking it out. You look at the way the presenters listen. There's no reason, if you're having $1 million tournament, that you don't have wardrobe staff and expect your casters to be showering. Because, you look at DreamHack Winter, and no disrespect to Zoot, he showed up, I think, for at least one full day with a completely crumpled shirt. Like, you can't keep giving people the excuse that you guys are just a small, nerdy, basement-dwelling community. And, outside of ZSX and DDK, and Jahar to a certain degree, it doesn't seem like the other guys gave too much of a fuck being at the premier tournament for the game, kind of dress like they're going to some sort of Sunday afternoon meet up with their friends.
Yeah, and
that's a big deal. It's a big deal, believe it or not. Presentation and first impressions are massive, and most people that looked at DreamHack Winter, if some of these guys are on, like, who are these bums? It's a big deal. I'm sorry.
Well, and I think that there are 2 perspectives of that, and this is another dichotomy of personalities, and how somebody feels about it, I think, is going to be based highly on what kind of personality they have. So my personality is I don't give a shit if somebody wants to dress in underwear. Prozac came to QuakeCon 2010 walking around interviewing people in his underwear, and I thought that was great. And I think that there are a lot of people who, if they knew about that and followed that around and saw that happen, they would think that's great also. It adds personality, it adds a little bit of chaos.
Absolutely.
It's something like that. But on the other side of that, there is something to the professionalism, and in the context of the biggest event of the year, having that professionalism seems like
listen, you don't want to give people shitty reasons to tune out, okay? And that's kind of a shitty reason. You're going on, you're being kind of broadcast internationally. Wear some nice new clothes, dog. Buy a $20 shirt. It doesn't cost much, and iron it before you get on. Like, I don't think that's asking a lot. And again, it comes to the issue of competition. If you look at how many other streams people have to pick from, and what the kind of standards those guys set, you need to be around those standards, my friend. You can't be showing up like with Prozac. I think that story is different because that does show a lot of personality, but that's because he's almost there butt naked. That's one thing, but showing up in a shirt that you've been wearing for the past 2 days, I don't think that shows any personality. I think not the kind of personality that people find attractive, like that's not something
right.
People don't want to associate with people like that. And this is a big part of the human psyche, and you got to consider these things. If you don't think that stuff is important, then I think you're misplaying the game.
Yeah, and well, I won't pretend to know whether some aspect like that would drive people away or bring more people in or not have enough impact at all. But what I do know is that there's plenty that's succeeded with messy shirts, and there's plenty that succeeded with clean shirts. And the root problem here, to me, I don't know that anybody's going to turn into the games and see these casters speak for 5 or 10 minutes, and then actually I do see that. If they are going to have to watch these casters speak, I think that's going to turn a lot of people off. I can't stand to listen to most of these Jahar and DDK, and I think ZSX was there also, and he was kind of interesting to listen to. But a lot of these shoutcasters, a lot of these casters, I just can't stand to listen to while they talk about the game, and then to sit and watch them speak to each other for 5 to 10 minutes. It's like watching ESPN. I don't want to watch five guys talk about the game. I want to watch the actual games.
I'm going to present the dichotomy to you. I completely agree. I first of all sympathize with them because, listen, I tried to cast today. When it comes to casting with Duel, I'm awful at it. I recognize that. I try to improve, but I don't really know how. And I think CPM's a really fast game, so it's difficult. But I'm bad at it as well. I just don't have the talent. But on the other level, on the other side, listen, if you're going to do it, you need to you're competing against everybody. You're going to be measured against the best people there. And I agree with you. With respect, I don't know what Machiavelli's doing here. I don't think he's been relevant in the Quake community for a very long time, and why all of a sudden they're trying to push. He actually said something very interesting recently. There was a thread talking about discussion, and he said something to the effect, yes, we recognize it and we are doing something about the design. And I was just like, this guy hasn't played since like 98, 99, or 2000, 2001, whatever. Why is this guy have any say in terms of design decisions?
Right.
That strikes me as very concerning because there's nothing in it I've seen from him that demonstrates any kind of competency in video game design. And you know what? I don't say that disrespectfully. It's a hard thing to do. There's very few people in the Quake community, people who have the intelligence to be able to fully flesh out these ideas and then to be able to criticize it themselves. And Machiavelli does not strike me as one of those people. And in fact, I think it was another thread again in the past day or two where somebody, an anonymous poster, said, listen, I remember you from when you were in high school and stuff, and you were a prick then, and things really haven't changed. We were touching on this earlier, you mentioned 04, but then Machiavelli is another guy who, from the perspective of some people in the past, is not that particularly nice of a person, and some reason has been thrusted into the forefront of Quake all of a sudden, even though he isn't really relevant in the game, hasn't been for generations, to be frank with you.
Well, part of why Machiavelli is involved in this, and I'll go out on a limb here, is that he was a very close kind of
mentor to 04?
Mentor figure to Zero. I wouldn't say mentor because I think that word gets used a lot when really he was just a friend of his, and they just
played together.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but he just happened to be older and cooler or whatever at the time, and he was in the scene, and 04 was coming up. So I'll say mentor figure, big brother, whatever you want to call it. But he was like that. He was a good friend of 04's, and I think part of why he's involved in this project right now is because of that. And part of my fear here, and this may be a totally baseless anxiety, but part of my fear here is that the problems at id Software are so ingrained in their office culture that at this point the company is bleeding out, and guys like Machiavelli are being invited in to kind of pick the meat off the bones by their friends before the company goes under and this failure is put out and fails. With Machiavelli, I think he's being brought in to be sort of a flag to rally behind.
Listen, I should just say this again. I'm just speculating here, and I've actually found the comment. Maybe he just mistyped. It was a typo. Lots of things can happen, but it says here, and I'll read it to you verbatim. The game is, people are criticizing the game, blah blah blah, and he's defending it. He said the game is also not finished and is still being changed. Full stop.
Yeah.
We have increased player stacks. We have increased player stacks coming, which will increase TTK. The 30-second change to health and armors and small armors was very much needed, as recovery from damage was too easy. Reading from that, it leads me to believe that he has some sort of influence on gameplay design, which, again, I don't see anything in his past or in his post history which indicates that he has any competency in that. So why does he have a say in it?
Yeah, exactly. And here's another issue. with that is if you're playing with these minor things to tweak gameplay, then you're wasting your time away from the larger things that actually need to be addressed. And maybe they have enough resources to focus on both. So I won't say that's necessarily the case. But it seems to me like if that's your public response to the criticisms, oh hey, we changed this respawn time or we changed the stack size, I don't think that they're in touch with the complaints that the community has. And the comments I've seen from Machiavelli, and I actually saw that thread recently, and there was a comic that an anonymous guy posted,
Yes.
that I think perfectly encapsulated what Machiavelli tried to say. And really what his argument is that it's almost like victim blaming.
Yeah.
If a woman gets raped by somebody, you don't tell the woman that she's a bad person.
This is your fault.
For getting raped. It's your fault. And what I see Machiavelli doing is saying, and even Tim Willits in his telling Quake Live players, hey, you need to stop playing Quake Live. I see them, and this is a pervasive mentality, and there's a reason I'm bringing this up, and I'll get to it in just a second, but there's a pervasive mentality of these software guys that the players are doing something wrong for having a preference that isn't the thing that they've created. And the problem that I see with that mentality is that mentality comes from losers. And I don't mean losers in the sense, oh, you're an idiot, you're a bad guy. I mean, that's the mentality of a loser. A loser blames other people for the problems that they've created for themselves. And I see that argumentation is coming out as a form of justification. And when people feel the need to justify themselves that way, it's because they feel as though they have something to lose from something that's going to happen if they don't justify that. And in my experience in the professional world and, my work and everything else, when people justify themselves like that, it's to keep their jobs. When
I think so as well. I think, because you have to keep in mind, it wasn't too long ago that Tim Willits also said, listen, if you guys want to play Quake Live, keep playing Quake Live, no problems. You can't say that, in like September, August, then in December be like, actually, you know what, stop playing Quake Live. Something's gone wrong, and like when you kind of communicate.
That's a very contentious method of dealing with your community. If you want to play it, go play it. We don't care. That's
absolutely. It's very adversarial. It's very confrontational almost. Like, do whatever the hell you want. It's just like, wait, hold on.
I dare you. I dare you to not play my game. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and this is a problem I have, and this is why I say it's kind of that justifying your bad performance by blaming others' activities. That sort of personality belonging to losers. It's the same thing. The self-fulfilling prophecy of failure, of challenging people not to participate in your game, of not being inclusive because people might disagree with you. That's a self-defeating personality right there. And that's somebody who's driving people away from the game more than drawing them in. I don't think Tim Willits is helping the game at all by making himself a public figure for the game at all.
I thought this was this was supposed to be Zero Four's role to a certain degree, and I say that with respect. I don't know what his obligations were, but when they announced Zero Four, from my perspective, what Tim Willits right now is doing a press run. I thought that was good. They're going to let Zero Four kind of be the face of that. Like, we're gonna have this World Championship class veteran come in, be the face of the game, the face of the esports. Listen, he's a tall guy. You know what I'm saying? He's a bit of an elder statesman. He's been around the community. A lot of people respect him or dislike him, but he forces people to have some sort of opinion of him one way or another. You can't ignore him. He's a big name in the community. Tim Willits has kind of taken upon himself to do that.
I think personality-wise, that there's just not a lot there as like a celebrity. His achievements, what he's achieved, and everything else. It's great. He's obviously a champion. He's been with the game for years and years and years. He's earned everything that he's gotten from everybody, whether it's positive or negative. But from a celebrity, from a personality, from a public relations perspective, it's just like there's nothing there.
This has been a general problem with the Quake community for some time. The lack of personalities in the community for people to kind of rally around has been a little bit worrisome. When you look at it, when people hit that kind of level, they usually kind of bounce and go onto more to greener pastures. You know, look at DDK for example, who's like somebody, you know, his personality, he's not a bombastic personality, but for whatever reason, he seems very honest, he seems very knowledgeable, you know, he speaks very clearly, you know, he's a good looking guy. People listen, people are attracted to him, you know. And once he hit a certain level, he bounced because he realized that, you know, he does have something worth kind of, which is a bit more than, you know, to other communities than the Quake one. I don't even know if
it's necessarily just because he realized there was something worth more, but he's also just a great guy who seems to be constantly searching for a new challenge, and there's not a whole lot of challenge in a dying game. So I think I think
that's fair, completely fair,
more, but. And so, and I agree with that also, and I absolutely love DDK, and I even enjoy the DDK and Zoot combo because I think it's a good dynamic of personalities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they kind of add balance to each other in a lot of ways. But for Quake Live, and this goes back to my point about the cultural relevance of the game. It's just a series of missteps in drawing people in. You know, they say don't judge a book by its cover. But the books that I've read in my life, the cover has been a big factor of whether or not it drew my eye.
Usually impactful, you know.
Yeah, it's a very impactful, and whether or not you want to pretend that the cover doesn't matter. For me, I'm not going to pretend. I see the cover, it draws my eye. Whether or not I read it from that point on is a second question. But if it draws my eye enough that I read the back of the cover for the description and I'm drawn into it, then I will continue to I'll buy it, I'll read it, whatever. With Quake Champions, the cover is, you know, a 80s romance novel with a bald Fabio on the front, a bald, short, fat Fabio on the front, and he's just extending his hand and saying, "Join me." And behind him, you've got a cyberpunk guy with a mohawk injecting himself with drugs.
Yeah, like, well, who thought this was a good idea? For fuck's sake, this is some real, like, this is amateur hour in software. Let's be frank. Some of these designs are goddamn fucking awful.
Yeah, and I hate to take away from anything that anybody's created, because I do believe that creative productivity is a good thing. Even like I said before, with the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Even if they ultimately cause problems, I think that the endeavor should be celebrated and appreciated. So I think that these people who are creating this game have actually achieved something. It's just so far not a successful realization of what they may have imagined it would be. Yeah, so that's why I say it just goes back to culture. It all goes, as far as drawing people into the game, it just goes back to culture. Gameplay can be secondary in a lot of ways, and it is. I mean, there are thousands of people, more people playing walking simulators at any given time than are playing Quake, and they're not playing those for the gameplay. They're not playing those for anything. It's just for whatever that game provides. And right now, Quake, I don't think is being true to its essence or true to what made it good. And that goes back to what you said earlier about the single player side of the game kind of operating as a training course for adapting and getting acclimated to the game.
Yeah, but they cannot make the mistake of actually approaching the first single player as just training. Like, this is the mistake they've been made. Quake 3, it made sense because the multiplayer aspect of Quake 3 was so novel, and the concept of like a multiplayer only game was so fresh and new that that in itself was the shock factor with Quake 3. When they said there's no single player, people were just like, what? That immediately made people stand up and say, okay, and pay attention.
Well, that's true. And then there's also the reality that Quake 3, and this goes back to the positions concept that we were talking about earlier, Quake 3 was in a position that it could be multiplayer only because so many people were familiar already with Quake and Quake 2.
Correct.
That its gameplay wasn't a stretch by any imagination for it to be popular with what was culturally relevant back then. The culture was overwhelmingly Half-Life, Unreal, Quake. All of those people knew how to play each other's games. So there was nothing that they didn't need a single player game. That was what a game was back then on a computer. At this point, they do need something like that because that's not what a game is anymore. A game is clicking a mouse and, you know, letting a cooldown happen before you can click your mouse again, or walking through a forest and looking at trees, or, you know, fantasy novels with underage girls wearing animated panties that you can use VR glasses to pull down. And there are so many different ways to play a game now that there needs to be an introduction to the system, and it has to be, like you're saying, I think a genuine single player component, not just the boring,
and not a
tedious
component,
work.
experience. People have to become emotionally attached to the game again. And the way you do that is by having a strong story. So I understand saying that is very easy, but listen, these guys are experts. They've created an entire genre with Quake and Doom and Wolfenstein, and have very highly acclaimed projects that came out as recently as 2017 and 2016. So they're more than capable of doing it. It's just they obviously, or somebody at Bethesda, id, Zenimax, whoever it is, just looks at Quake and just says, this IP is not worth it for us to do it in-house. We're just going to push it to some third-party developer that really doesn't have any track record. And if it floats, it floats. If it doesn't, I guess we'll bury it for now, and when the time is right, we'll bring it back up. Because Machiavelli said something like that as well recently in the same thread, that this is really the last hurrah for Quake. And when he says something like, "Oh, we are going to do something about the stacks," which informs me to some degree he might have some sort of decision-making capacity as far as design is concerned. I think he has some sort of internal knowledge with what its software is thinking, and this could be the last Quake game.
Yeah, and that could very well be true. I don't know, I don't know what that means for anybody, because if nobody's playing it anyway, what does it matter? And if people can continue to play CPM or Quake World or whatever it is that they're playing and enjoying, and continue to do that for the rest of their lives, then is it really important whether or not Quake?
Yes, I think so, because I don't think we don't need a massive amount of players to have an active competitive community. Like, the idea of playing in a TDM league with 3 of your friends, or a CTF league with 3 of your friends, should not be, in the realm of fantasy for your Quake player. I think it has the appropriate, things. It has the appropriate ingredients for it to make it a fun, exciting, deep game. Well, I think Quake players overrate how deep Quake is. Ultimately, I think the decision tree, although it's kind of exhaustive, I don't think it's particularly extensive. Like, if you look at, really deeper games, there's a bunch of decisions you can make, and each decision, you can break that decision tree down for, like, miles, whereas Quake, I think, is a little, there's usually 1, 2, or 3 decision you can make. That one decision could be particularly deep, but, there's only 1, 2, or 3 you have to make. There's other games I think you have to make a lot more, and you have to take into consideration a lot more. So I don't think Quake is that particularly deep, but it's deep enough for people to have lots of interest in different styles, and for there to be a vibrant competitive community. And I don't think it takes again, of course it takes a lot of work and money, but they've already been spending it in the past 10 years with the Quake Live failure, with the Quake 4 failure, with the Quake Champions looking like to be failure,
Yeah.
So they've spent that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I don't want people to confuse being a shallower game than some other to being less.
Nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. And I think Quake players just have to accept, the intellectual side of their game. Nobody looks at LeBron James and be like, well, he doesn't have a PhD. It's like, why is LeBron James exciting? Because he can just do shit that nobody else can do, and there's just like a mechanical level of like depth to the game that's like really ridiculous and pushed by the boundaries of the people that have the greatest amount of talent. That's what really Quake does as well. I think Quake players have gotten lost in this narrative of like being deep and 7 steps ahead and all this other nonsense. Really about just shooting fucking glowing green things, ultimately,
That's true. I mean, you can reduce a lot of things that way, but what I was really getting at is that Quake is at least Duel.
Yeah,
it can be a very chaotic game type. There's a lot of formula. There's a lot of formula to it, but
absolutely, it's not. I'm not saying it's random, by the way. It's obviously not random. But
but that's actually a good point. There is some kind of pseudo randomness to it. So you have a game like Counter-Strike. You start the round, you're on terrorist side, you buy your weapons, you go up a specific path toward a specific goal, and that's great. In a Quake duel, at least before Quake Champions, there was no specific path. There was nothing, and so every gameplay situation is ultimately, like you were saying before, of you wish you could have a heat map of a particular map to see where people toxicity, to see where people die, where people live, whatever else. In Quake that happens also, but there is a lot of chaos that's generated from the lack of boundaries. Compared to something like CS:GO or compared to something like Dota or League of Legends or any of those games, there's an element of intelligence required there that is required in a higher degree than other games. And I think Quake players mistake that element of intelligence as being more important than other elements of intelligence. So it's not necessarily that it isn't an intelligent game. It's just intelligent in a different way. It's intelligent in managing a plethora of potential realities and choosing the right one when a particular circumstance is met. And that circumstance is constantly changing moment to moment. So that you have to have an adaptability to new information that a lot of games don't require because they aren't as fast and they have more boundaries that restrict the possibilities. So there's an inherent chaos to Quake that the good players, when they manage it well, create that chess-like sense because other players just cannot understand how they can maintain this level of control when everything they do in the game results in the opposite of what they desire happening.
Yeah, and I think, the distinction between Counter-Strike and Quake is that in Counter-Strike, I think because there is so many initial setup things that you have to do that are so similar, I think the decision points are a lot clearer. Whereas Quake, you constantly, because how you position yourself and stuff become very different. In Quake, you constantly are dealing with, immediately happening very organic situations that repeat themselves at ad infinitum, and that could happen at any given time. And Quake is really about managing, I think, as you're saying, the situation as it comes about, because you don't have complete control of forcing the situation. The other player has a large role. But in Counter-Strike, it seems like the initial positional setups, force the game to be approached very, I think, substantially different from Quake. With Quake, you have, things just happen on the fly constantly. Counter-Strike, I don't think that happens as much. And I think in chess, that doesn't happen as much.
Counter-Strike is very orderly compared to Quake.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some forgiveness that I give to players who say Quake is like chess, in the same sense that I would give forgiveness to my kid for using an inappropriate word to describe something when the metaphor is apt. It's just the wrong item in the metaphor, the wrong object in the metaphor. So Quake may not be like chess in objectively, but metaphorically it is like chess. And forgiving the person of them saying something objectively wrong, I can see why they say it is that way. But I agree with you. Objectively, it's absolutely nothing like chess. It's fast paced, it's open, it's nothing like chess. Mm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. And there, there's so much to get into with the gameplay differences. But that's that. Well, no, I just wanted to say that I think that really touches on kind of what the essence of Quake is. And in some sense, with Quake Champions, they've added these rounds to duel, and I think kind of taken away from that aspect of what separated Quake from other games. Um, so one other thing I would really like to see from Quake Champions, and maybe they're too arrogant to do this, or maybe they just don't see it as being a potential for success. But I think that a very real possibility for them to draw in players from Quake Live from every other game is just to give them a classic mode. Just give them a classic mode with classic physics, updated graphics, updated everything, and let them have a classic mode and play that in tandem with whatever new modes that they think are going to be so great. We saw the same mistake with Quake Live when with the loadouts and all this other stuff, is people just didn't want it. It's like when Coca-Cola in the 80s introduced some new flavor and got rid of the original flavor. Everybody complained, and finally Coca-Cola came out with Coca-Cola Classic, which was the original flavor everybody loved.
Whoops. Sorry, I had muted myself. Hopefully it wasn't for too long, but I think it just... No, it looks like it was only for the past minute.
Oh, okay. Well, and that's the only point that I'm making right now, just based on what we were talking
about.
I
think the issue with loadouts isn't loadouts. The issue with loadouts was really poor execution. If you look at NTF and CPMA, guess what it has? It has loadouts, and it has regenerating health, and it has regenerating armor. And if I told you there's a mode in Quake that has these three things, you would say this is an antithesis to everything that Quake is. There's no concept of weapon control, there's no concept of like armor control, there's no concept of real health management. And I would tell you, yeah, those concepts aren't really there in that sense, you're right. But it's still a lot of fun, because you know what? Ammo boxes start to mean a lot more. You have things like backpacks, they start to mean a lot more. There's ways of implementing things like loadouts, like auto hop, like timers, that make a lot of sense and can, help ease the learning curve of somebody that's never been in a game like this, and get them. You make the default game that you have in your mind of VQ3 or CPMA, the 10-minute rule, everything as you're thinking right now, you make the beginning player say, this is ultimately where you want to get to. You're not there right now, so while you're here right now, we're going to give you all these crutches, and as you improve, we're going to give you certain icons and badges and stuff like that make you feel proud of overcoming a particularly difficult task. And now you can strafe jump, and now you can bunny hop, and you know what I mean. Like, there's lots of there's good execute. There isn't just bad. There are bad ideas, but even with bad ideas, if you execute them properly enough, you can have something that's interesting and fun to play with. And I think id Software, again, with I say this with a lot of respect, because Sinker has never disrespected me, I think there's a real lack of foresight, a lack of understanding when it comes to what Quake is and what Quake players want. And I don't think Quake players are necessarily difficult people to please, but you can't just give them you can't just take two good ideas, mash them up together and think you have a better idea. I was talking to Butcher last night. You can like a steak and you can like, ice cream. Putting your ice cream on your steak and eating it isn't going to be better than either one of those. In fact, it's going to be considered probably going to be worse than both of those combined. And this is the mentality that I feel like id Software has. Let's take the good parts of, good stuff and just mesh it into one big thing. I don't think that works.
Yeah, and there's also as related to the Tim Willits coming out and saying Quake Live players need to start playing Quake Champions. He made the game for them, that sort of thing. You can, from that perspective, drawing people into the game, a game that they don't want to play, that they have no desire to play, you're not going to do it with this new flavor of steak ice cream. There has to be some concession to those guys. If you want those guys to play, if you really want them to stop playing Quake Live, give them something to play. And what they've given them to play is not what is going to replace Quake Live for them.
They're kind of, and on Steam, to be honest, they cannibalize themselves in a lot of ways. They have Quake 3, Quake Live, and Quake Champions all competing with one another. Yeah,
and I'd say really only Quake Live is competing directly and actually winning.
But it's still a form of cannibalizing your own market. And it's very interesting that they've kind of decided to support both.
And in one sense, it's kind of endearing to me, because it makes me see, decisions from guys like Sinker as maybe somewhat noble, if not incompetent, or some other forces.
I think it was completely haphazardous, to be frank with you. If they knew
so it could be just incompetent.
Well, not incompetent. I wouldn't describe it as incompetence. However, listen, I am about to release a brand new version of Quake Champions, and the existing version of Quake isn't currently on Steam. they put Quake on Steam not too long ago. I think it was the last holiday season, right? And
I'm not sure.
In this holiday season, I think it's only been 12 to 18 months since it's been on. Like, the timing here is so odd, you know.
Yeah, and that's where I say it's either unfortunate or somehow it's just incompetent, something along those lines, because it's not working for them. Period. And if they continue to make the same decisions, enact the same behaviors that continue to not work for them, well, is it negligence? Is it incompetence? Is it ignorance?
You think anybody's going to get fired?
Okay.
Or do you think
I were somebody,
or let me ask you this: do you think Saber right now is going to be protecting some jobs at id Software? Because do you think Saber fucking up this royally? Apparently, and I listen. From what I see, like, it looks like a pretty big fuck up. You think Saber will? People can just be like, listen, Saber will fall on their sword. I didn't code it. You can't blame me.
Yeah, I there's a possibility for that. I won't pretend to know the internals for managing id Software, Bethesda, ZeniMax, whatever. If it were me and I were dealing with these people, I would want to find a way to salvage whatever is possible in the best possible way for everybody. If that means that somebody has to be fired, then somebody has to be fired. I don't know enough about it to say whether or not anybody will be, but I can't imagine taking the flagship property of id Software, which is Quake. You can say Wolfenstein.
No, it's
you can
not.
Say Doom.
It's Doom.
You can say whatever you want.
It's definitely not the flagship property of Quake.
The flagship property, the only most important game that nobody could argue with, objectively true. Quake. You take that property and you absolutely destroy it. If that's what happens, if it's not successful in any way, if it's totally destroyed, just utterly fails, then I could see that people would be and probably should be fired. If it's successful to any level, then what does Bethesda care? What does ZeniMax care?
Absolutely. If it's even now, I don't know how much money they've spent, but they could have. There was something I was watching yesterday about like AA games, and there was a successful AA game that came out, and they made it roughly cost about $10 million to make. Let's say they've spent $10 million. I don't think they've made $10 million back yet. I don't think they're.
I don't know if that's. I don't know if they have, and I can say that they probably have some pretty decent operating costs. If you assume that they have Tim Willett's working for them, Sync Air,
let's just say $10 million for all.
04, Machiavelli. That's a pretty large chunk of salary to pay for the development of this game.
Well,
and what are those guys actually developing?
I don't know Machiavelli's involvement. I'm really confused.
What I've seen him say is that he gave up his job, he gave up $10,000 of assets, he's already in the hole, that he's in it for the long haul, he's not in it for the money, but I gather that he's working for id. I'm not sure if that's true.
He said he lost $10,000 worth of assets? Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know how. I believe in that same thread, he mentions losing roughly $10,000 already, or he's $10,000 down, something along those lines.
Is it maybe because of travel costs and shit like that? Who knows?
I'm not sure. But it's there. Whether or not it's true is beyond me.
This is how out of touch he is. Okay, when Quake Champions was first made, there was some sort of private server that a bunch of people were invited to from the existing Quake communities, and Machiavelli was one of them. And he is convinced that people in 1998 have the same aim as people as 2017. And they don't. I'm sorry, they don't. Aiming got a lot better. People aim got way better, and that's part of it is because of technology, but part of it just because people played the game way more. You know, like
Yeah.
I keep saying this where I say this with respect and say something kind of disrespectful, but I don't mean this like maliciously, but in the Quake community he's kind of a dinosaur, and he's not in touch with what's happening. They don't know really what's going on, and you really don't, I don't think you can have meaningful design discussions with these people, because I don't think they have an idea of what they're doing.
Well,
I think id Software, you know what, I'll say this much. Sinclair does. Maybe he's never like demonstrates. Maybe you don't like the decisions he's made, but when you speak to him, you can have a relatively interesting, and I've seen him talk about it. Game design. He does take a lot of things into consideration. I'm not saying I'm very good at it. I'll tell you for sure I'm better than Machiavelli, like for sure.
Well, I can tell you that I am better criticizing other people who are maybe good at it than they are at criticizing me about criticizing them. And I'll have to close with this because I've got to take off. I've got a dinner party I've got to get to.
Okay.
But I'd really love to do this again sometime if you'd like to in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll close with this. And this comes from my experience working in web development and architecture and engineering, just from professional experience. So kind of not gaming related, but just general kind of corporate management, business relationship kind of stuff. There are different types of personalities who have different hiring practices based on their idea of how work should be done. And there's a very specific type of personality who it's like a crony personality, somebody who's so aware of their incompetence and how bad they are at what they're doing that they hire people who are more incompetent to them so that they won't be replaced by them.
They're basically buying themselves time by hiring somebody more incompetent by saying, it was this guy's fault, right?
Yes, it was this guy's fault. They'll never be challenged. Their decisions won't ever, and there's, like you're saying, there's always a fall guy there. And so what happens is there's this perpetual cycle of failure and incompetence. And I see without an effective decision maker in that sort of environment, I can see that ideas would just be designed by committee and that people who don't feel like they're the leader would not give any criticism. And that there's just so much incompetence in such a situation that things are just going to be overlooked and missed.
Design by committee does not work, man. Listen, you might hate CPMA, but it was designed with usually a lead designer that was making the calls on a lot of things. Of course, there was meaningful discussions that was happening in the background within the dev team, but because of that, it was able to kind of create its own avenue with respect to how Quake is played, and as a result continues to be played. And if you look at the communities that came after CPM that basically copied a CPM as much as possible, not copied, I say that with respect to these other communities, so please don't crucify me. If you look at Warsaw is pretty much dead. If you look at Xenotic, I think Xenotic is more Quake worthy, but if you look at some of the CPM clones that came after CPM, they all died. None of them survived because they because they were able to copy it up to CPM, and once it got to saying, okay, now we have CPM, how do we make it more interesting or more fun or better or different? They didn't really know what they were doing, so you constantly see a mishmash of ideas. And if you look at the early Warsaw, the strong and weak ammo, conceptually, at least initially, it seems like a good idea. But the more you think about it, the more awful of an idea it is. And ended up
I disagree. I respectfully disagree. I absolutely love that aspect of the game.
But you know what? They ended up changing it because the player base was just not happy with it because it just didn't pan out. Even if you conceptually think it works, at the time the player base were vocal enough, and you have to respect the developers that at least say. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but
no,
I'm
but
intending to, and I just want to
the
address
fact
that
that they pulled it out, I think, indicates something about it, either their execution of the two ammo system, or or you can take it as a general criticism of the two ammo system as a whole, because having a 3-part design step to get weapons and fire them seems a little bit wrong, like, okay, I need to go pick up the weapon, now I have the ammo for the weak one, okay, so I'm running out of ammo, I need to go pick up the weak ammo, okay, now, but this is the weak ammo, so I need to go pick up the strong ammo, I think it becomes a little bit too tedious in such a fast game. But,
sure. Okay, so, well, to address that, and I'll go beyond that, but I'll address actually the actual tangible aspect of what they design decisions were right before 0.6 came out, when they got rid of all that stuff. But I'll also address a general idea too based on that. When they pulled that out, there were a lot of people complaining about it, but a lot of people were complaining about a lot of things at that time. And this goes to the idea of incompetence or lack of direction with the development team. the Warsaw direction, the development team had no real direction. There was no dictator at the top telling people how things were going to be. There was a lot of committee back and forth, and then vocal people in the community saying, "Oh, ammo, oh, timers, oh, auto hop, oh, this, oh, that." And so there were all of these things popping up, which may or may not have been relevant or correct. And so they kind of picked on some things and changed those things, and then changed some maps and some other things that caused a lot of problems with people who'd been playing for a long time, and people just kind of got burnt out on it. But the general concept from that I kind of wanted to address, and I've got to make this the last thing I talk about, is that a development team, and this echoes id Software with Quake Live, and I think Quake Champions to an extent. A development team that picks and chooses to change itself based on what some whimsical community says is putting itself in the hands of that community as a gamble. And these people may not be correct. There's an appeal to popularity fallacy, where it's this idea that just because everybody or many people think a certain way, that means that certain thing, the conclusion of what they're thinking, is true. And that's a fallacy. It's not true. People can think whatever they want. Many people can think all the same things and be totally false. So when people come up with a theoretical complaint about a game, like the ammo feature, which when I was playing was 0.5, and there was only strong ammo and then regular ammo that came with a gun pickup. So you had gun pickups, and then all the ammo around the map was strong. So it gave you incentive to move around the map, control ammo and stuff to deal a lot of damage. When you get a feature like that and people start picking it apart, oftentimes they're just picking. And I've found that with a lot of communities, there's a large majority of the community that will pick at small things that are ultimately irrelevant to the core gameplay. And that picking, addressing that picking, changing something because of that picking, causes unintended consequences in other areas of the game that weren't predicted and weren't thought of as part of the design concept, because it was just based on some whimsy of a popular opinion. So
yeah, it could just be that the idea wasn't. I don't think it's the greatest of ideas. However, it seems like the execution. If you're telling me the design team was kind of whimsical to begin with,
definitely.
I'm going to be a little bit, skeptical of their ability to kind of execute on some of these things, because I think maybe there is something interesting to explore there. But again, I think it's the vast difference again of like between Quake Live implementing loadouts by just giving everybody weapon, and then doing it something like NTF where you kind of balance things out and spread it out and actually make it into something interesting and as a fundamental part of the game. I don't know. It seems like there's been a massive brain drain, to be honest, in the Quake community. I know you have to go, so before you have to go, shoot, I was going to say something else, but it doesn't matter. Let me ask you some quick rapid fire questions. I think
sure,
because it'll only take quick. And you have to answer them quickly, and you can only give me one answer, okay? Straight answers.
Okay, I'll try. I'll do my best.
Your favorite game?
Oh, fuck. Next.
No, there's no
we can
next.
Go back to that one.
Okay, favorite mod.
Does Counter-Strike count? I'll say
yes.
Counter-Strike.
Okay.
Favorite game, favorite whatever, yeah, Counter-Strike.
Favorite opponent to play against?
I like playing against Tyrell, or K-Dog, some people know him as, in Quake Duel. That's one of my more enjoyable guys to play against, yeah.
Favorite map?
Blood Run, by far.
Any memorable moment, or your most memorable moment in Quake?
Yeah, there was a game that I played with a guy. I can't make this a one-word answer, but I took about a 2 months off of work, and I just went in and started doing independent web development. So I had a lot of free time at the time, and I dedicated myself to playing Quake Live, to getting as good as I could. And I went from 1400 elo to 1900 in the span of about 2 months, just from constant practice and everything.
Damn.
And there was one match. Yeah, it was a big leap, and it was incredible. It was really enjoyable. I changed the class of players I could play against, and just it was really fun. But there was one guy I played against, Jasonian or something like that. I can't remember his name. And in the past, he had always just absolutely destroyed me. And in this game, everything was on. I mean, I felt like I was 2100 elo. I knew intrinsically, inherently in my body, in my soul, I knew when Mega was coming up.
Oh, okay,
I knew,
that's dope.
I knew where he was. I kind of knew what position I needed to put myself in to best defend an item. It just all came without thinking. It was just it all connected right there. And that
when
one,
it clicks,
just clicked.
it feels good. And at that point, again, it's more
and
like
I get chills
it's
right
more
now.
like
It's
more like a dance than it is like playing. You know, you just kind of your body is just reacting. It's dope.
Yeah, and I've always found Quake to be a very meditative game. I can shut my brain off. That's why it's not like chess. You don't have to. I mean, some people
you don't have to do these hard calculations. Yeah, that's right.
No, you don't. And I will shut my brain off. I'll find myself thinking about random nonsense in the middle of a game, and suddenly snap back to focus.
Still be
I love that.
Somebody's ass.
Yeah. Like, oh, what is this? Oh, hi.
Worst opponent to play against?
Tyrell, also.
Least favorite map?
I really, if we're, I gotta say Campground. If we're doing Quake Live,
damn.
If we're doing Quake Live, I cannot stand Campgrounds. It's a terrible map. Awful map.
Most recent album you bought?
That I've bought?
Yeah.
I went through a phase years and years ago where I knew some guys online that made some music. It was a band called Da Bears, and they made like West Coast beach music.
Is Da Bears in any relation to the CS player? Da Bears?
No, okay. Not even, nothing. Just some random guys from San Diego I knew from a Mars Volta forum. So I went through a phase where I had a couple of drinks and I decided to look up some old people I talked to, and I found his old music and I was listening to it and ended up buying a few of their albums just as a thank you for being a part of my past or something along those lines.
That's dope. I always love supporting the artists. If I listen to music, I end up buying the album because it's like, fuck it, man. I'm getting something out of it. I think you should as well, and you deserve. Even if it's shitty pop music as far as people are concerned. So that's dope.
Yeah.
And your favorite TV show right now?
Oh, that's a rough one. I don't watch a lot of TV, and what I do watch, I tend to despise. So I'll say that I've been rewatching The Office with my family, and I've really enjoyed it.
We never got to this. We always because it's always been about CPM, but I guess I could have changed the question. I always ask people who the single god of Promode is, but I guess for you, who is the single god of VQ3 Duel?
A VQ3 Duel. I
can only pick one person.
I gotta say Rafa. I just have to say Rafa. He's so consistent in his results and his play style, and he influenced so many people in the way that the game is played. I know there's cooler and everything else, but I think for consistency and being the end cap of the game, because that's what he is. He is the end cap of the game. I think that he is
above CZM.
Shit! I wasn't involved in.
Okay, one last question. Sorry, because we couldn't do any community questions. Who is the greatest ESR troll of all time? And secondly, are you Fizzle?
No, I'm not Fizzle.
Are you sure? Because Fizzle is somebody intelligent pretending to be dumb, trying to fool intelligent people. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's somebody's obviously not stupid behind the Fizzle account. Somebody knows you. Yeah, it's just like, sure. Yeah, it's not even about that. It's just sometimes the substantial aspect of what is posted are interesting.
Yeah.
So who's the single?
Sometimes there's some irony there that hints that he has a subtle grasp of
absolutely.
The hypotheticals. So
I still think it's you, by the way.
I'm not. I can 100% promise you I'm not Fizzle. I don't play any of those games very much anymore. Right now, I may post anonymously because of some recent history that's gone on with the site.
Are you currently an admin, or when are you coming back if you're not an admin? Because
no, I'm not. I was driven off the site.
Okay, so you'll be an admin in a couple of weeks again. I'm sure.
It's possible. I'm sure. I won't discount.
Who's the biggest troll? Who's the best troll? I guess
in the history of the site,
as far as
I would say, if I can't say myself, I would have to say that K-Dog at his prime was a pretty good one until he started getting really serious with it.
What about Daniel
in his time? Daniel, no, I found those guys, they're just so brash. Yeah. They're so brash and so simple, and so they're looking for a reaction, and there's no substance to what they're saying, and that's fine if you want to be a troll and just get reactions.
You think is Ica a troll, or is he actually that stupid?
I don't think he's stupid at all, and I think that there's a lot of irony and subtlety in a lot of the things that he says that get taken serious by people who have serious opinions about things. And
sometimes he talks about very unserious things like Quake, and it seems like something is not connecting. The game isn't being played properly. I don't know
maybe
why.
maybe
I'm not
he's
even
done some
talking
hard
about the
cuts.
more serious political stuff, because I just generally tend to try to ignore as much of that as possible.
Well,
when it
I
comes
think
to
that there's
Quake,
a certain type of personality, guys like that, who there's a level of intelligence that gets missed because they're very silly and very non-traditional in the way they discuss things. In some sense, anti-intellectual, which doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't intelligent or that they don't speak about intelligent things. It's just that intellectualism in academic speaking kind of precludes being silly in a lot of ways. And I think guys like that break the rules of expectations for intelligent speech.
I'm going to lump him in with the other people who are intelligent but are too brash. They're not on the fizzle level of subtlety yet. Do you know, is that fair? Like, he's also very, very abrasive with his...
Well, he comes from like a 4chan culture of abrasiveness also, so there's some of that there that I think a lot of people
being
miss.
asked about Jamario. Is Jamario a troll? And
Oh no, I think he's brilliant. I think he's like a Donald Trump. I think he's a brilliant guy.
yeah,
I think he's really smart.
Real brilliant.
If he's a troll, then he's even more brilliant in my mind. But I believe he's a very intelligent, very productive, very successful person in a lot of things, and that
you're
a lot
a
of people.
real dick sometimes, Brandon.
What?
I think he's real successful. Do you think the BAFTA is real?
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't care.
God, that doesn't bode
If it's
well.
not, if it's not real, then great. There are a bunch of people who are so hyper focused on it that he can bring it up in any thread and instantly turn that thread into a 10,000 hit thread.
So Tyrell, you said is the biggest. Oh, K-Dog is the biggest troll of all time, the best troll of all time.
Yeah.
Who's somebody that who's on the verge of being banned because you're just sick of dealing with them?
On the website on ESReality?
Yeah.
I'm not a big ban guy. So first of all, I'm not a big ban. I'm all for.
That's what I'm saying. Has there somebody that's pushed you to that limit before?
Yeah. That's why I'm prefacing this. I'm giving it the weight of
the gravity.
The weight of my agnosticism toward banning people. So I believe that people should just be able to post. You shouldn't have to approve images or anything like that, and that the community takes care of itself in general, and admins shouldn't have a whole lot of work to do. So the closest I've come to banning anybody was Kareem, and it's only because there was a recent administrative post talking about spam and how he spammed the site before. And I actually defended him in the admin forum, but he posted something that it was so just blatantly spammy that it annoyed me that he treated the website like a whore. So I kind of made it a point for him to not post those sorts of things anymore. And that's about the closest I've gotten to banning anybody. But really, actually, I took Fizzle off of probation recently, so you can thank me for that.
Are Fizzle and Dizzle related?
I don't think so. I didn't see anything in the database that connects them. Wow.
So are you Fizzle or are you Dizzle then, Brandon?
I'm neither. Trust me. If I were anybody,
Okay, let me ask you this. Who's the most annoying user that you've had to deal with? You're just like, God damn it, I'm so sick of dealing with this goddamn prick all the time. He's not breaking any rules, but it's so annoying.
From an administrative perspective, nobody. From a perspective as just a user of the site, I think there are a couple people in the past, usually administrators, who are just overbearing. They take their role so seriously that they can't allow anybody just breathing room to have a personality. And guys like Zoo pop into mind.
Zoo, ZHU?
ZH or XH or XOU. Wow, I was about to spell ZHU.
Hey, listen, Zoo. I guess we'll have to have this discussion at another time. But we touched on it a little bit. There has to be a balance between the ability to express and then the ability of the people who are trying to ensure, there's not just meaningful dialogue. Some dialogue has to be kind of meaningless. That's a part of the kind of, I don't want to say human nature, but a part of our speech. Sometimes we just talk about stuff and it has absolutely no meaning, no bearing, no point of reference. It's just nonsense and garbage. But there has to be a balance between kind of, saying, okay, this is the kind of crap that we don't really need and doesn't really contribute to anything, and whatever it does contribute to really kind of takes away from what we're trying to do here. There's got to be at least some sort of general goal and agenda outside of just people posting stuff, because if it's just people posting stuff, that's not why ESR has, traditionally been like interesting to visit. It's not just because people post, it's because the nature and the subject of the conversations that's being had. And I think Zoo, a lot of the admin work that he did helped facilitate conversations about Quake. And,
oh yeah, absolutely.
The stuff that he would ban and maybe be overbearing about, I don't know what they were, so I can't speculate, but, there's definitely some threads, in my opinion, and that doesn't mean to say that I've particularly ever lobbied for it to the admins and say, oh, you guys gotta get rid of this. It's just my opinion that have serve no purpose other than to kind of incite, like, really ridiculous discussions from people who have, it's not even people lying to one another. It's people just bullshitting one another. People just kind of,
Yeah.
And that's fair. There's definitely has to be spaces for that. But sometimes I think, there's definitely been periods in ESReality where that's kind of become the dominant thing, and then like what Quake is. And I think it has it says a lot about the. I guess ESReality sometimes gives you a measure of how healthy the Quake scene is. Because if people are just talking about,
I've had this discussion before, and I'm going to make this quick, and I've got to go actually at this point. But I've had this discussion before with people, and they make the mistake of assuming that because there's so much shit talk going on at one time between people, that's the community.
No,
but it's an incorrect assumption. The issue is that there aren't enough players. There isn't enough general conversation to drown that out. So what you're left with is what's at the bottom of the swimming pool after you've drained it.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, again, I think you can't really look at ESReality and be like, this is the fault of ESReality. This is really the Quake community. I'm sorry, there isn't a lot of people playing. There isn't a lot of activity. So people are just going to talk about, you know what? Trump and North Korea might go to war because that's a pressing issue for pretty much every member of. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's only natural that more relevant topics come to kind of rise to the surface.
There are only so many hardware threads about what sensors you can use and who's the best and whatever else comes up. There's only so much you can talk about until you get new people and new events in the game.
Yeah, if some magical 17-year-old kid comes in and starts ripping everything up, guess what, man? ESReality is going to be on fire talking about this kid. Do you know what I mean? But nobody like that has really, like, if you come about in ever, like, who was the last person to really make an impact in the Quake? Probably Rafa. By the time Rafa made his impact, he'd already been the last person to really come in and blaze a trail in, Quake. From what I can remember, was El Pajro, and El Pajro just kind of came out of nowhere and took over the scene all of a sudden. That's the last person I can really think of.
Well, let's leave that on that note, so I can hop in the shower and go.
Well, Brandon,
help my
thank you
sister
so
with
much
business
for
no problem. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. I'm sorry it kind of started a bit later, but we had some legendary games that we had to.
That's fine, and I enjoyed actually getting the chance to learn something about them while they were going on. But if you'd like to do this again, I'm more than happy to do it. Just let me know.
We will. Yeah, no, we'll definitely do this again, probably sooner than you think, and I'll think of some because there's a lot of things that I had intended to talk about that we just never got around to doing. But I would love to do this again. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll be around.